being Brent crude oil. Then, all these commodities that are produced in the Ukraine-Russia area. And in the budget documentation, we had a whole analysis of the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the global, particularly key commodities. And it's been really interesting to see that many of the predictions that the team put out in that analysis have actually come true, particularly this huge rise in wheat prices, sunflower prices, which have fed through into food price inflation. And then phosphate rock, which you may wonder why that's on the slide, but many of these things actually go into fertilizer, and that has also driven up food prices through indirect effects, because obviously fertilizer is a very important part of agriculture. And then on the right-hand side there, what we've got is just a selected few countries in terms of their inflation rates and how they've been rising, and obviously we've seen that also in South Africa. Back to the South African economy then, to look at what's happening in our own economy. There was obviously, if you look at the top left-hand graph there was a bounce back in the economy in the post-COVID, obviously after this huge contraction. And then on the right-hand side, looking at the different sectoral areas of where the recovery has taken place. Most interestingly is to actually look at the lines beneath the zero axis, and to see where the economy is actually not growing that rapidly. And it's quite noticeable that it's in manufacturing and construction. And this is quite a problem because these are two sectors that actually employ quite a number of people. Interesting enough, there has been and we'll dig into that in a moment when we get to the Western Cape, there's been really interesting things happening in agriculture, which is quite important, obviously, for the province. But on the bottom left-hand side is really what is happening right now, which is that growth or GDP has gone back to 2020, so that's sort of pre-pandemic levels. When we say go back, it's not growth has gone back, it's the overall level of GDP. So we're producing as much today as we did in 2020, which means we're actually just running to keep still. We haven't got bigger since then, which is not necessarily a bad thing because obviously COVID was a huge hit. But the real problem is the orange line, or it's more like a yellow line, which is the fact that employment numbers haven't recovered to post-COVID levels. And that's really been the story of the recovery, which is that employment is taking a very long time to recover. And we do expect that the economy will have quite a sluggish recovery. We at the moment have very high levels of debt, elevated debt service costs. The economy is expected to grow sluggishly of about 1.7 in 2022 and 0.3 in 2023. We've actually had to think quite carefully through the projections right in the last few weeks because, as the Minister highlighted in the speech, the load shedding and the electricity constraint right now is something that we didn't all quite expect it to be as severe as it had been. And so this will have significant impact in the next year because we're not quite sure exactly how much load shedding we're going to have. There's still quite a lot of uncertainty there. That said, in terms of where we expect major growth contributors to come from, it's agriculture, manufacturing, trade and transport. And interestingly enough, the growth outlook for agriculture actually remains very, very positive, which is very good for the province. That said, the risks to the outlook are obviously this rising global inflation trend, because what will happen is probably that the Reserve Bank will have to continue raising rates, which will slow the economy, but inflation obviously hurts particularly the spending power of poor people and actually causes, it's not great for anyone really. Ongoing power outages, as I've indicated, and then these high inflation prices, growing unemployment, and socioeconomic decline as we have a very tough year. If you go to the province, a very similar story, and that's because the province really tracks the national economy. So we had a rebound in 2021, but that was just after a contraction in 2020. But once again, the really interesting thing is that agriculture has outperformed all other sectors in the province and has grown by 44.9% over that period. So on average, it's obviously not 44%, but it's about 5%. But really highlighting the fact that agriculture has been quite a good area of growth for us. And that has been supported by what has really been a boom in agricultural exports. which is great for the province, but really, really highlights the fact that if we want to continue growing these agricultural exports, we really have to deal with some of the big constraints that we have. And there, obviously, port and expanding the port is very important. And there have been a lot of initiatives by the Western Cape government working closely together with its partners in Transnet and the national government. But that really is something where we can unlock even further growth. And similarly to the national picture, the recovery in GDP has taken place, but not as yet a recovery in employment. So very much mirroring what is happening in the country. Turning to fixed capital stock. So this is obviously very important in terms of driving forward growth, is to make sure that we have enough investment. Some interesting analysis in the book, and we can dig into that in questions if you like, which is the fact that we will need a significant investment to even just solve the unemployment challenge, because obviously there's a multiplier. So the more investment you have in the economy, the more jobs you create. But from our analysis, we need significant amounts of investment, and thinking through how we do that. So one of the big changes in the PERA this year is that we have packaged the chapters into the 3 recovery themes. So that is jobs, safety and well-being, job safety and well-being. And we're looking at each of those specific areas, because what we're trying to do is understand exactly what the problems are in each of those areas, so that we can think through, when we get to the budget, how we respond to those challenges. So you'll see when we do the MTBS in the budget, there will be specific interventions that are targeted at these 3 areas. And so the PERA chapters really just try and dig into each of these issues to try and understand them better, and to try and unpack them a bit more. So the really interesting thing that's been happening with the job market is, obviously during COVID, there's been quite a big change in people's people that go out to look for jobs. There was this weird, very good news, I guess, of the unemployment rate going down, but actually what that just reflected was that a lot of people were not looking for jobs anymore because they were so discouraged. Now that we're coming out of COVID and people are now looking again for jobs, there have been these really interesting things happening in the data in terms of the unemployment rate versus the unemployment numbers. So you'll see there that the labor force expanded by 162,000 jobs, labor force participation rate improved by 3 percentage points, employment opportunities increased, unemployment increased, and unemployment rate increased. So it's a bit odd that both employment is rising and unemployment is rising, but that's because of these shifts in the labor force and how that is happening. And then the expanded unemployment rate has also increased. That partly also reflects the fact that more people are looking for work. So one has to be very careful how one interprets the labor force statistics right now. But obviously, the key thing that we're trying to achieve is just to get more people into jobs. So one mustn't get, I guess, sometimes too distracted by all the things going on. Really, the question is how many people are getting into work. And then we go into quite a detailed breakdown by race, gender, age, and education. The really interesting thing, of course, is that the more education you have, the better your chances of having a job. So people with tertiary education obviously have lower unemployment rates. Clearly also applies to secondary education. And obviously, as you get older, you have a better chance of getting a job. That's often because it takes quite a long time. There's a lot of research on this. It's quite interesting that over a long period of time, a lot of the age does help you a lot. It seems to provide you with a way of understanding how to get a job. And that also talks to some of the interventions that you have to do in the labor force, is how can you kind of accelerate that and provide opportunities for the youth to get into work? Because it does appear that once people have had a job, the probability of getting a second job is much, much higher. And we've had a number of employment interventions, particularly expanded public works programs, which is just to give people that first job. And then if you look at the gains and losses per sector in the Western Cape, we've done quite well in finance and transport, but in similarity to the rest of the country, the construction has really been the big hit. Obviously, that is partly as a result of COVID and this collapse in construction. But as the Minister, I think, highlighted in the speech, that is looking up a bit. So we hope that construction jobs will come back. Also, one of the things that is in the budget is obviously also highlighted in the speech is this huge investment drive, particularly in education and health, which will also crowd in construction jobs. It's a very short summary of quite a long chapter. I'm going to do these really, this is the top hits. The next chapter just looks at well-being and safety. So this is to try and understand where we are as a province from a well-being and safety perspective. Now, one of the interesting things that's happening in the South African economy over a long period of time has been this decline in the fertility rate, and that's quite consistent with as people become wealthier and as people, as the economy grows, fertility declines. So that's not unexpected. And similarly, there is an aging of the population. So the share of 60 plus to total population has risen. And there has been an increase in inequality, and that's partly as a result of migration trends, but also, as I highlighted, a difference in which sectors are creating jobs and which sectors are not creating jobs. The interesting thing is that the Western Cape's overall Gini coefficient is still lower than the rest of the country, but the worrying thing is obviously that it's rising. But I think it's quite good that it's still lower than the rest of the country. These are quite important figures for us to keep track of because obviously we deliver services to healthcare services, mainly to older population, and trying to understand where they are in the province is also something that we're looking at quite closely. Life expectancy, that has obviously has risen quite significantly over the last period of time, from 59 to 66 and 63 to 71 years. There has been this odd dip as a result of COVID, but we hope that that was just unfortunate, very fortunate pandemic, but that seems to come right. The big story, which also, as the Minister highlighted, this net in-migration story. So over the last 5 years, we've seen about 300,000 people coming into the province. And then we have seen the percentage below the lower poverty line come down. Population growth is declining slightly, which is quite good. But then the Human Development Index, so overall, which is kind of an aggregate of all the different indicators, has risen. Then we go into a deep dive into each of the areas. So one of the outcomes of this long period of population growth and this net in-migration is obviously a substantial ongoing increase in the number of learners in the Western Cape. We are looking at between 18,000 and 21,000 new learners every single year. And that obviously makes us focus on trying to get additional schools built and teachers hired and so forth and so forth and so forth. And so the budget has, over the last 2 or 3 years, really focused on adding in that area. But I mean, this is very helpful for us because we now, Department of Education projects forward the number of learners kind of by district and by area to make sure that they have schools and teachers in the right place. Then on education, still on the bottom side there, what we do in the Western Cape, which is a little bit different to the rest of the country, is very deep dives on systemic testing results. It is quite a worry that the systemic test results have come down as a result of COVID. Now that correlates with other data that we have from NIDS-CRAM, which is telling the same story, which is that we really seem to have had a very tough impact on education as a result of COVID. Unsurprising, because people, kids had to learn online, et cetera, but how do we respond to that is really going to be the focus, I think. Then the causes of death, also really interesting. This is quite, the data comes with quite a lot of lag, so COVID doesn't feature in this data yet, but this is, so you can kind of think of this as non-COVID related, and it's quite consistent over a long period of time. Also very interesting is that it's often a lifestyle related, so diabetes, heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, a bit of an eye test for me, etc. And so that also, the Department of Health thinks about how they respond to this from a more of a whole of society perspective. And then the top right-hand one there, this is how we keep track of the two big indicators, which are the number of doctors per 100,000 and the number of nurses per 100,000. Both of those have improved. So we have more doctors and more nurses per 100,000 over the last few years. But there has been this really interesting impact, and it seems to be a global impact on mental health. So although the number of people coming into the mental health system seem to have declined, we are seeing a rise in suicides, which is a bit of a concern overall. And then I've made the point about the top causes of means of mortality being lifestyle related. Then obviously we do a lot of analysis to keeping track of crime rates. There's a lot of detail in the book on this, a lot of analysis of, for example, particularly hotspot versus non-hotspot areas. That's the bottom graph there. That just tries to understand, we've got the strategy under LEAP to try and work closely with the city to improve crime in these hotspot areas. We've done an evaluation. It's interesting, there does seem to be some indications that crimes have come down in the hotspot areas, which is good. Top one goes into by the type of crime categories. All crime categories have improved. So sexual offences are down, robberies down, drug-related crime, etc. The only one that's gone up is murder, and that's increased quite significantly. And that's something that we also are looking at as we go into the budget process and under the safety priority. So in terms of bringing out key findings, so this has been highlighted, I think, quite well in the speech, but just to reiterate the fact that really the focus is on driving infrastructure investment in the Western Cape, not to give away the budget quite yet, but there has been a long shift towards putting money in for infrastructure to meet demand for social services, but to also provide employment opportunities. It's quite a simple, in a way, I guess, solution, because you've got rising numbers of children, to simply continue to build more schools, because it also brings in job creation opportunities. So it's been a big focus. As I said, it helps the struggling construction sector and greenfield fixed investments. We've been working very closely with the Agriculture Department to look at how we also support agriculture, because it does seem like that's been doing very well, and it's obviously an area of a very important area for the province. Then, we went into quite a lot of detail in the speech about the energy challenges in South Africa and how can we as a province deal with that, because I think if one relieves the energy constraint, then there is a huge opportunity for the province, and we're working very hard on that. There is a lot of debate about the role of education and employment. It really does seem to us that we do need to continue to focus on driving high levels of education, improving education, make sure that we continue to meet up with these learner numbers, etc., and also look at new models of service delivery. And then in terms of the data, understanding the top causes of mortality in the province and how we actually deal with those too. It's a very brief summary, Chair, of quite a long document. It goes in quite a lot of detail, but we're open to taking questions now.
Thank you so much. Obviously, we're not going to go through all 119 pages today, colleagues, but I'm going to open up for questions. I just want to quickly see if there's hands in the house. I saw Member Mackenzie's hand went up quickly, Member Nkondlo's hand. Okay, are there any hands online? Ms. Kamish Ahmed, if you can just assist me there. None? Okay.
I'm trying to put up mine.
Okay, it's not showing.
I'm also trying.
Colleagues, we're not going to shout out. Just hang on. We've had MS Teams for a very long time. It was members Mackenzie in the house and then members Nkondlo. Member Dugmore indicated he was struggling with his hand. And Maran's hand is up.
And Mvimbi.
Okay, and Mvimbi. Thank you so much. Ms. Kamish Ahmed will assist me continuing with the hands on the online system in that order. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You're saying we're going page by page? No, just kidding.
No. Take the rest for your bedtime reading, possibly.
Thank you. Chairperson, I'm going to, if I may, just start with the Minister's speech. I'm trying to ask it very diplomatically, more easier. The biggest stumbling block for growth at the moment, what would she say that is in the Western Cape? And then if I can just quickly go to the last slide, and this is while it's on my head, on energy, on the post-agricultural sector on page 19. And I just wanted to, on the agriculture sector, one is, I almost forgot there was a drought 3.5 years ago. There's so many things happening, COVID-19, load shedding, this we forgot. And what has the impact been? And are we still in that phase, by the way? I honestly don't know if we're out of it. I think we're at a temporary state of disaster, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if we're still in that. And how, if we, talking about future policy interventions, we've recently, Chairperson, I'm not sure that report is tabled yet, been to Brazil. And what do you see the future policy actions looks like to help us getting from 44% to 88%, for example? One of the things that we picked up is we've got Elsenburg, obviously, Boland College, where they have 38 agriculture colleges in one region. The scale at which they do things is just remarkable. So would that future policy insights be more agricultural colleges, more agri-development for us to get from 44% over 10 years to 88% over 10 years? If you can just share if you're not, then obviously we'll get to agriculture later when we get to the commodity. And then during this speech, the minister mentioned, I think there's 5 or 6 municipalities they're helping currently with renewable energy, or if we can, what is the timelines on that? I know the city of Cape Town is busy with their wheeling project. And how is your department looking to assist more municipalities? And also regards to storage, because I know a lot of people are complaining about storage is the big issue. Is that you encourage municipalities, given we've got vast land in the Western Cape, to ensure that when we reach state 8 in 3 years' time, because we don't know where we're going, let's be honest, I don't think anybody can give a clear answer at this point in time, to ensure that that any of our sectors, including agriculture, is not hampered. What is that plan, if there is such a plan? And then, at the moment, given we're at stage 6, and I presume our hospitals are burning diesel like crazy, and everyone is using generators, are we at this point, have we accessed our reserve for some of our government departments that needs it? Is it that this going to have a massive impact on our reserves? I presume something as simple as all our government cars has to get to municipalities. You have to do inspections at some government departments. So are we at the stage, and have we? And I'm not sure if the minister has that look at a budget. Is stage 6 and what's currently happened the last week, and we don't know what's going to happen the next 4 or 5 weeks, is this going to have a big monetary impact on our medium-term budget policy statement? And then the last question, Chair, I've read somewhere that Treasury overestimated our collections in a Business Day article. Was it just an opinion of an analyst? Is it fact? And is it? Yeah, I'll leave it at that now. Thanks.
Yes, I would like to go to the next member. Member Nkondlo.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I must say, I think all of us were sitting in interesting times, where predictions as we would have known them, and analysis, whether scenario analysis that we give, given all the turbulence, sometimes is everything that we must always go back into, because what you think, is going to be a possible future of tomorrow, depending on all the different, whether it's natural and other shocks, actually putting all of us into such an unstable space. And I'm raising this, trying to get into my head, the type of information as presented by you, Doc, of the uncertainties of the future. Maybe just to try and latch on from what Member Mackenzie has asked, if we consider from where we started in 2019 with COVID, and I think all of us have been in boardrooms trying to think about, I know here in the province, HOD, the Fiscal Future Project. At some point, I think we've already started about economic recovery for some time. Now, I'm trying to understand, because every time we speak and I look at the key findings of the future things that we're talking about, are we making any inroads in terms of the kind of analysis that you are gaining from some of the discussions that you have done. And I'm one on the fiscal future ones. It's one area I've been very much interested in as a concept that was presenting. What is it that it is showing us? Because in any way, whether you believe that private sector minister is going to lead the growth, the role of government in that, there seems, if you look out there, there seems to be serious challenges, for markets, in a traditional sense. So I'm trying to understand if indeed we're placing particular expectations, in those assumptions. Is there evidence that is actually helping us to say, indeed, such will happen? And one of the things you are raising, Doc, is actually a very interesting thing about employment recovery taking longer. And it's a very key thing, because we have said, Minister, you've said one of the things you want to do, is to be sort of a job creation champion. In this particular context, how is that going to happen? One thing, when an ordinary person who is not necessarily an economist is listening, all they want to see is that is the jobs that you have been talking about, which is what you would like to be your focus. But there is evidence that employment recovery is taking longer. Now, if that is the case, what then is our response to that particular reality that science is proving when we talk about our own narrative of being growth, job creation, sort of a focus? So I'm trying to just get into your head so that I can, at a simple level, understand what it means. And I'm raising it, if one would be able to tell me, if we look at the growth of agriculture, the growth in the manufacturing versus the jobs, are we seeing, in terms of a job creation in those sectors, are we seeing something that is positive that says if we focus in those sectors, indeed the speed at which we are going to get jobs out of those growing sectors is going to help the kind of unemployment that we are having in the country? And I'm linking that also with the focus of education, because if you talk about education, also education is not just a short-term thing, it's a long-term thing. If you talk about the outcome of what you require for people to be ready for those jobs. So I'm asking sort of those particular parallels. In that, also another question in the jobs space. There are two things, I think, those that analyze jobs, they have said in the South African context, that the longer, particularly for youth first job, the more difficult it is for them, for future job prospects. And now I'm asking, in this particular context, if you look at the Western Cape numbers, unemployment numbers, what is the situation in the Western Cape, and how do we seek, with this notion of job creation, how do we seek to actually disrupt such a reality, to get young people who are at this point frustrated because it takes them more than 2 to 3 years, from a university to get a job? Because one of the things that we know about private sector is that private sector, one of the things that it requires to date predominantly is experience, which young people do not have. It takes them, so these internships, learnerships, I'm not sure the extent, because we have not been getting, substantive results from them helping fast enough to get young people into the employment, including the issue of the missing middle. Because when you go into the engagement in communities, one now of the biggest problems you are finding is the 36 to 55-year-olds, who also are saying, because our policy is focusing on youth unemployment, properly so, because young people in number are unemployed, but there is also this gap that is falling through the cracks, which is the 36 to 55-year-olds. So once again, I'm asking, in terms of the plans that we're talking about, how are we seeking to respond specifically? Do we have programs to sort of attend to this? My last one, Chair, coming to you, HOD. In as far as this thing of trying to integrate this very great research work from Pero to Mero, how are we doing in ensuring that the information we gather from this work and the data indeed gets into planning and decision making? If we say we do, what tool are we using to actually determine that, and we can say at this point whether we use a percentage or any form of measure. I'm trying to understand that, including at a municipal level. If we are moving the mayor now, justifiably so, can we say by doing so, we can actually say to ourselves, we are seeing a difference in how municipalities are taking the mayoral information and integrating it in their planning. So it's one thing to say we are trying. I'm trying to find out whether do we have a measure that we as the oversight people can be able to go back to and say, indeed, the great work that is in this exercise is actually integrated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Member Dugmore is next, and after those three hands, I'm going to take the next three hands, which I'm informed is Maran Vimbi Murray, just so the department is able to deal with the amount of questions per round. I see that you are anxious, Member Mackenzie, but you must wait for the next round. You must add the number 6 later. Just hang on. Member Dugmore, and then I'm going to allow Minister and the department just to deal with those, and then we will open for a second round of hands, which will be Maran Vimbi. Thank you.
And thank you, Chair. Chair, my question relates to what appears to be once again the lack of detail in the PERO in regard to actually tracking the assets. The asset base of the population. I don't know if the theme of race denialism sort of is actually an instruction, that comes from the Premier. The MEC, in a speech, lauded the Premier, and we all know that in not a single speech of the Premier is there any reference to inequality based on race, based on gender. And I'm afraid that when it comes to the ownership of assets by people in our province, which besides issues of income through jobs, are actually critical indicators for people who are able to, for instance, raise loans to begin businesses. So the issue of land, of land in urban areas under title is owned by South Africans who were historically classified as white. Rural agricultural land, only, in fact, less than 3% of rural agricultural land is in black hands. So I simply fail to understand that why year after year, if we're looking at asset ownership as an indication of inequality, we simply don't have this. And that's why I would like to ask, because if you listen to a speech of the Premier, if you listen to the speech of the MEC, there's absolutely no reference to inequality and race in regard also to income patterns, etc. So can I just ask, what is the reason that in regard to asset inequality, there's no focus on land ownership in the Western Cape broken down according to race? Is there any reason for that? Surely that's a central part of analyzing this provincial economy and whether in terms of asset ownership, houses, land for agriculture, that's an indication of inequality which should be a concern to us. Or is it not a concern? Because it just doesn't seem to change from year to year. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Just so that the procedural officer has the question down correctly, are you referring to the race breakdown and the inequality stats on slides 14 and 16 of the presentation?
I'm just talking specifically about land ownership, both urban title and agricultural land, and actual detail in regard to that. In the present, I didn't notice that in the slide. If it's there, please point it out to me. But I didn't actually pick that up in that slide.
Okay, no problem. I know in the slides that we presented on slides 14 and 15, there was also breakdowns of those, but I'm sure the Minister and the department will be able to help us with the respective statistics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the honourable members for the questions. I'll go through the responses as I can, and the rest I'll ask the team at Provincial Treasury to assist. Some of the stumbling blocks to growth, those would be what we call enablers that we would need to focus on to help the private sector expand and create jobs. These sort of things include things like a stable electricity supply, the functioning port, so that although the agricultural sector is growing, that we can actually export those products, increasing infrastructure investment, diversifying trade, and then crucially, of course, is business confidence, so that we can attract investment and foreign direct investment to help grow our economy. In terms of the timelines for some of the municipal energy resilience projects, it is uncertain at this stage. I can't give the honourable member timelines specifically. Also, just to bear in mind that some of the caps, especially on the 100 megawatts projects, were only removed 3 months ago. So work is furiously being done to try and advance projects, but as we progress, I'll be very happy to keep the member informed on some of those timelines. Diesel, of course, with the load shedding, is of course putting strain on departmental budgets without a doubt. And then the collection rates, I will ask the team to respond to, as well as expanding on any of those other items that the member has raised. Honourable Nkondlo, you raised key findings and inroads in the analysis and fiscal futures, as well as employment recovery, employment taking longer to recover, which is something that this analysis has brought up to the surface as an insight. And I'll ask the team here to talk a little bit about labour absorption into the economy, specifically unemployment and how we look at that, youth in the missing middle. And then Honourable Dugmore, on assets and land ownership, I'll ask the team to talk to that. But there are racial and gender breakdowns included in the document, especially in the jobs chapter. It's dealt with extensively. And I would point the member to those chapters, and if the team would like to expand further. Thank you very much, HOD.
Thanks, Minister, and thanks, honourable members, for the questions. Yeah, I mean, I think the Minister is spot on in saying the most proximate stumbling block is that of the energy constraint. I mean, I think everyone has felt it this week, but it's obviously deeply, deeply starts to affect confidence. Are you going to put your resources into fixed investments in an environment where you can't be sure of an energy supply going forward? So it really does destabilize people's sense of what the future might look like as well, a prolonged energy crisis of this nature. So I think we're all aware of that, and it will take time to turn the tide on that in terms of bringing more renewables online, more security of supply online. It was, I think when the Premier and the Minister met with Mr. Durator from Eskom some 3 weeks ago, you could see that he was absolutely laser focused on those issues, and I think that there's pretty much all the municipalities in this province are laser focused on how quickly one, or how much we can accelerate the timelines to bring new supply, new sources of supply online. On the question of agriculture, I think that team can obviously talk to that. I should maybe take a step back and say we're really thrilled that you're asking these questions, and these are the debates, because they're coming out of what the data is asking us to debate. And so, it's not that there's one correct answer here, but if you would want my analysis of the agriculture sector, and we will furiously debate this in the Treasury team at a technical level as well, is key to growing agriculture is around export, making sure that they've got channels for export growth. They've been able to see some real opportunities. It's a difficult environment. We had some of our citrus delayed getting into Europe and so forth. It's easier said than done to grow exports. And then when you have a port that is not functioning optimally, that really, really is a binding constraint to what more you can do. Agriculture is a very fast changing and dynamic sector, certainly in the Western Cape. It requires large amounts of R&D to bring new product to market. That requires agricultural development finance behind it, and that is another area that we need to make sure is functioning optimally. to make sure that we keep a dynamic, quite science-focused agricultural sector that we do have in the Western Cape, because that's how you compete in markets, and that's how you grow job opportunities in the sector and for the province. But I'm sure my colleagues will have other views on that as well, because I really do encourage that. That's the point of the Pero, is to debate precisely those questions. What is the best thing to do to grow, to work with our assets in the province? I think I've spoken time in terms of what the provincial government is doing around the energy side. I think the minister's been very public around what a priority the municipal energy resilience project is, and that is the way in which we are consolidating support to municipalities to work through things that she mentioned in her speech, wheeling tariffs and so forth. And so, you know, as well as the preparation of new generation investments. Some municipalities are further ahead. They're taking different approaches as well to this. So George has a different approach to Cape Town. We work with people on the approaches that feel right for their contexts. And obviously encourage everyone to scale at the pace at which they're capable of scaling, and that's what our energy unit is spending its time doing with municipalities, and they are making good progress in that regard. There are unfortunately timelines from when you reach financial close on a project to when you're actually going to get your first power distributed from that project, which I think, when I heard it earlier, and the team can correct me, is about an 18-month period. And given that none of our projects in the Western Cape have yet achieved financial close at any scale, that's what we're looking at, and that's how long energy is likely to be. And this is just the first draft of projects to continue to be such a binding constraint for us. Right at the moment, we of course. I think the Premier had announced, you know, the Cabinet convened on Sunday evening. It's staying regularly abreast of the situation. The Disaster Management Centre is preparing its responses. Obviously, from a core provincial government concern, we're worried that we're wanting to make sure. In fact, we're confident, but we're wanting to make sure that our clinics, our hospitals, our core frontline services are protected, that our ambulances have fuel, and so forth. So there's a lot of work that's underway already in a coordinated way, and we've been meeting on quite a high frequency basis just to make sure at a top leadership level, both politically and in the administratively, to make sure that we are fully prepared for potentially prolonged or even elevated levels of load shedding, and that key strategic parts of the economy and of government services are poised to respond. We've learned a lot about how we do that effectively and efficiently from COVID, and I think the world has, and we're in the process of applying those lessons to a different context now in terms of the energy crisis that we're facing. We do have an approach, I think a fiscal approach. We've already speaking to our departments around what budget pressure this puts on them. The emergency measure is around can we be sure that we will have secure supplies of fuel, okay, of diesel and so forth. The medium-term fiscal pressure is around what the cost of that is. Obviously, with global fuel inflation, rising petrol prices, and of course increased usage that you had alluded to, Member McKenzie. So we are modelling that on a dynamic basis to make sure that we are prepared. And of course, when we need to adjust, we have a province that we have we're a fiscally sustainable province. We're not worried about our capacity to respond to that at the right moment, without, of course, encouraging inefficiencies in the use of of secondary sources of power and so forth. We haven't accessed anything yet. We will be assessing that going into both the adjustments budget and into the 23 MTEF. So we're fully alert to the issue, and I don't think that there's, from our side, of course, too much concern at this point on those basic things. On the overestimation of collections, I mean, I read the same article with you. Dr. Havemann will probably have a view on the Minister of Finance's, Minister Godongwana's statements on the revenue estimation. It is obviously a very volatile time in the global economy, and so a lot of the underlying parts of the model that lead to the revenue estimations are dynamic, to say the least. And I don't know, Roy, if you wanted to add around that. Member Nkondlo, you asked what changes from our analysis. The Fiscal Futures project is ongoing, and we're very excited in terms of how it focuses our attention in an incremental way on challenges. Dr. Havemann can talk to it a little bit more, but from my perspective, our analysis of Fiscal Futures led us last year already to focus very closely on compensation costs in the province, and it adjusted our strategy accordingly. Much tighter engagement with our departments, resourcing them with evidence, and I think when you get to the Q1 reports, you'll see some of the impacts of the choices they've made in terms of personnel management and how we're making sure that we have a sustainable personnel management approach in a more integrated way in the province. And when Annalise talks to that data in our next session, she can pause there and we can pick it up. I think the other area that comes out of it is around infrastructure. And I really actually like the sort of emerging indicator that the minister put out as a challenge in her speech, which is to say it's really our conversion rate from the value of building plans passed to the value of buildings completed. That's really what we're looking for in that fixed investment space. So we put new data here to try and crystallize our focus on infrastructure investment. It's not just our own infrastructure for its own sake. It's an input into a broader economy, and it's other parts of fixed investment in the economy that are probably more important than the schools, hospitals, and so forth, but roads that we are focused on. And of course, at an institutional level, the province is responding through modernizing its approach to infrastructure management as a whole, with the new Department of Infrastructure, as the minister had indicated. Member Nkondlo, you asked the trillion-dollar question: is how will more jobs be created? I think we would be arrogant to assume that South Africa has an answer to that question, but the data starts to lead us closer, and even your use of the data showed how we're getting a much closer sense of where we need to focus our attention. Again, people will have various views, but I would divide them into two sets of views. Do you focus on the factors of production, land, labor, and capital to grow an economy and to make sure that it is a job-rich growth? Or do you focus on sectors like agriculture or mining or transport or whatever? What is the relative balance you give to those factors? If you're focusing on things like labor productivity, you look at issues like education, you look at health, you look at housing, you look at public transport. If you're focusing on agriculture, you look at a different set of issues. The second way I think to look at it is what are the options you have within that broad rubric? Do you focus, for example, on scaling up public employment programs, which do have some effects? But they come with their own challenges and risks. One of the very successful programs that we've had recently is the Presidential Youth Employment Program in the education sector. And I think that people have been sort of alarmed by how successful that's been relative to other things we've been doing in public employment in the past. We need to ask the question, why? Why was that so much more successful? I've got some views on that myself. But that's around the realm of public employment programs. There are other things to be done in the youth development space, in that school leaving and job preparedness space. When we talk about the first job, that critical first job, There are things that are about making it easier to making businesses more willing to hire people. What makes it easier for them to bring a person on board on a part-time basis and then eventually on a full-time basis as a small business grows. It's a very hard choice to commit to someone as an employee with a responsibility to that employee if your own future's uncertain. And then also, what are the sources of startup finance? So in each of these areas, you will see in our current provincial programs, you will see them reflected in various departments. The question we need to ask in the budget process going forward is what's working and what's not working? What do we need to do more of? And by implication, what would we now do less of? And those are really the hard choices as we navigate forward. And where those answers or the directions of travel are going to come out is in the Minister's medium-term budget policy statement in November, rather than me being able to give you the answer here. It's not my answer that really matters at the end. I'm a functionary. It's the executive and its leadership of the province. You ask, I think, a great question around how Pero is influencing policy making. What we do as the provincial treasuries from now on, and we've done a little bit kind of sneak previews before this today, but we start to relentlessly re-emphasize what the evidence is saying and challenge that as we go through the technical parts of the budget process. Later this week, the executive will convene in the medium-term budget policy committee, and it will have a discussion that will start out with this data again. We will then go into a series of medium-term expenditure committee meetings with every department in the province. And this will be our prior contribution to that debate. And we will be expecting to hear how departments themselves are responding to this. Minister Wenger will also be in her visits around the province talking to communities, the business community, and so forth, around what their pressures are, as she does on an ongoing basis. And that feeds in, it then reflects. But for the Mero, with wanting very much to keep our powder dry for the Mero itself, we're trying to really split it out as a separate product, and I think everyone can see that that's a value add for us to do that. We can't really force municipalities to do it, to listen to the Mero. We do talk to them about it in our strategic engagements. Some municipalities, and I think Mr. Boyson may want to comment on this, have in the past sort of copied and pasted. I don't particularly like that as an approach. We would rather them digest the information for meaning and look at how it impacts their budget. So that's the direction we're going in. I accept not a quantitative measure that I'm giving you in response to your question, but I think what we've dealt with is much more procedurally. So we can measure the processes. Did we meet with all the municipalities? You can see in our APP, as you will well know, we do meet with them, and these are the things we discuss. But it's that quality of the discussion and our search for impact in that discussion that I think is what animates us in where we're going with it. And then finally, I think the Minister covered Honourable Dugmore's question around the asset base. I mean, I think you asked the same question last year, Honourable Dugmore, of whether there's been an instruction to not talk about race. I can confirm again, there's been no new instruction to suddenly not talk about race. We do talk about it, and we probably would anyway. As the Treasury, we tend to talk about things that that we think are critical in the development trajectory. I would say that again, with keeping we have provided additional information on some of the racial categorization of development information in the province in this Pero. Also, wait for the Mero, because you're asking a question that I think you're asking two questions around the asset base of households and then the potential racial stratifications in that asset base. Well, we're certainly digging into that issue in the Mero, and we are going to be coming with a very, very novel, original set of data still on a limited basis that's looking at property markets in the province, and this is really breakthrough data. for us. So it's not that nothing's changing year after year. We do try and respond to questions that are asked here, but we want to do it based on sustainable evidence basis as we go ahead. Let me just check then, I think, on the agriculture sector and anything else, Roy, that I may have missed. And Malcolm on the mirror.
Thank you. Actually, with regards to the question from Honourable Member Gondlo, whether municipalities do take into account the marrow in the planning, yes, they do. We do a test assessment in terms of our annual budget assessment process, which is the SIME process, where we do find that in the budget assumptions, they take into account the projections as outlined in the Municipal Economic Review and Outlook. We also do get requests from municipalities to brief them as part of the strategic planning sessions. We've had a few this year alone, if I could mention Bergrivier, Oudtshoorn and Bethel Municipality, and Swartland Municipality has also requested that we brief them on the marrow when it is stable. So it's in fact a daunting task to go to all 30 municipalities, but we do engage municipalities on request. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to agriculture, how can we take it forward another notch? I think it's important to note that agriculture made a lot of progress in exports, and that in itself shows that agriculture is a very competitive industry. But how can we take it further? We should look at, in certain areas in agriculture, there's tariffs that's still prohibiting, especially in chicken. That is a problem. So free trade agreements like AGOA should continue after 2025. And then obviously very important to exports is infrastructure, smooth running ports, well-maintained roads. I think that agriculture will go a long way with appropriate infrastructure.
Did I miss one out?
Yes, no, I mean, completely correct. I think that, it's really difficult to forecast. I mean, the member has said very well. I mean, I think in terms of the scenarios, is to try and understand exactly what's happening at the moment. And I have a great sympathy for the Treasury team to try and understand exactly how collections will work this year and next year. Obviously, there has been a rise in collections, partly as a result of commodity prices going up, which has really supported mining income from mining taxes. Inflation does help collections, but the overall slowdown in the economy has also been very, very difficult. I think one of the other parts of the collections problem has obviously been the strange effect on the labour market. If you think about that, a large component of revenue also comes from that, from personal income taxes. That has also been a bit of a constraint. So it is just a very difficult time for them to try and work out exactly what the collections will be. It's obviously very serious for us because a portion of we were hoping that there would be quite a good year because of commodity prices, inflation, etc., and they would have given the National Treasury the opportunity to allocate more money to provinces. But it does look that it's still a very difficult situation nationally, and so we do have to take that into account into our planning in terms of, we don't think that there will be significant increase in allocations at all actually next year in the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you so much. Next in the queue was Maran, Vimbi, Murray, in that order. Thank you. Member Maran, can you hear me? Okay, let's go over to Member Vimbi in the meantime.
Our policy choices, and also it will also should be informing our budget planning and situational analysis. Now, in terms of growth, it has been indicated that agriculture is the only sector that has illustrated some significant growth of 8.8. But I just want to check whether has there been some analysis as to this growth, to what extent has this economic growth also been translated into ownership growth so far as previously disadvantaged people or black people are actually concerned on the sector? Has this economic growth also translated to ownership by black people into this sector? Has maybe that analysis been done? Because if it's not, maybe the minister might indicate, maybe are there any plan in terms of the policies of the provincial government to make sure that this economic growth also translates to economic ownership by black people into this sector? We know at the present moment the ownership in this agricultural sector is very minimal so far as black people are concerned. I just want to check whether has there been an analysis made that while it's growing in terms of the economy, but does ownership also grow? If it has grown, to what extent has it grown, or by what percentage it has grown? Now, the second last question, Chairperson, I just wanted to check, based on the definitions of unemployment, in the narrow definition as well as the expanded definition. Now, I see when it comes to unemployment, I think it's in slide 13, where it's indicated on percentages. But then when it comes to the actual unemployment, there is, I would just look to get the actual figure. I think there is an actual figure. If I can go to that slide, there is an actual figure, but there's also a percentage figure. I would basically like to get the actual figure of the expanded unemployment as against just the percentage, because I see other figures are shown on, I think it's on slide 13, yeah, it's on slide 13, where it's indicated on percentage, but I would also like to get the figure. For example, unemployment increased by 116,000 or 15% to 891, but the unemployment rate, it has increased by, then it says that expanded unemployment rate increased by 2.3. I would like to just get, if you do have the actual figure as against the percentage figure. The last question, Chairperson, is related to on the sectors of employment that have been put there. I think on slide 14, it does illustrate that it illustrates all the other sectors, but I would like to check whether to what extent is there at the public service sector, because government also plays a key role on employment, and actually most poor people find the most secure job that they can get is in the public sector. And I'd just like to see whether do you also have a figure of the public service, in other words, government as a sector as well in terms of employment, because government also play a role in terms of employment. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Member Mbimbi. I'm informed Member Moran isn't online anymore, so I'm going to hand over to Member Murray.
Thank you, Chair. From my side, Chair, I was quite taken aback and found it very encouraging when the Minister in her speech spoke about the SSEG and wheeling. So from my side, I'd like to ask, what are the timelines for implementation of both projects? And also, which municipalities have been assisted for both projects to date? And then more broadly, I wanted to ask what support we're intending to provide to green tech sector going forward. I think this is a really fantastic start. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then I'm just going to take up then Member Moran's slot for this round then. On page 21 of the PERO, under figure 1.21, let's quickly go to that page. It speaks to the fact that it has been estimated that the South African economy has been impacted by 8 to 10% smaller the South African economy due to load shedding. It is also estimated there by, it says here, Alexander Forbes, that the cost of stage 6 load shedding at the moment is 4 billion rand per day. When you read on that same page, it speaks about that the impact of load shedding on the national economy has led to an estimated 1 million fewer job opportunities. So I would like to then latch onto the question of Member Murray. Member Murray spoke about SSEG and wheeling. But as the Western Cape, how are we going to protect the people of the Western Cape against load shedding going forward? Because once you start having rolling blackouts, your refrigerators aren't going to keep your food cold anymore, which makes me think of butcheries. When you have rolling blackouts, hairdressers won't be able to work because their whole job is using electricity. When your infrastructure breaks down in your butchery or your hairdresser, or whichever small business you are, is Eskom going to pay for the damage to your infrastructure when that energy surge comes back? What are we going to do in the Western Cape when children don't have electricity to study for exams? When we have to start thinking about importing diesel and what's because we have gas and diesel SOEs in our country that don't produce diesel and gas anymore. What are we going to do as the Western Cape to protect the people of the Western Cape in this time? My second question relates to harbours, and I see on page 41 of the Pero, you have a little blurb that you wrote there on harbours and the problems and the respective berths that are experiencing delays. I just wanted to find out what the plan is in order to reduce the waiting time at the harbours. I do understand that TNPA is a national entity, but it's gotten to a stage where provincial economies are coming to a halt because of the impact that these delays have. And it speaks there about a 7.6 day waiting time in order to export in comparison to 1 day. And then you mentioned in slide, sorry, I think it was 16, that it's not written there, but you mentioned that the Gini coefficient of the Western Cape is lower than the rest of the country. Do you have the figure for the rest of the country? Just so we have that information, please. And then my final question relates to page, apologies. Oh, now I can't find the page. But you had a figure in the Pero that I saw earlier about the condition of roads in the Western Cape. Sorry, I went through this book a little bit quick now. I will find the page number, but if you could just maybe explain to us how that, page 36, there we go. The condition of roads for the past decade. So obviously I have a lot of bedtime reading that I need to go do, but if you can just quickly explain to me the statistics around the paved road conditions and how you work that out, and going forward, what the plan is in order to assist there. Thank you so much. Is that on the same topic?
Topic. So, Chairperson, I'm also joining Member Maran in that other meeting in Vredendal, so I'm leaving now. My voting right will be taken over by Member Fry. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much. And I wish you a safe journey. And hopefully it will be on the good conditions of paved roads in the Western Cape. Minister and HOD, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the honourable members for the questions. Honourable Mvimbi, the Pero informing policy decisions, and in particular growth in the agricultural sector and how this translates into ownership by Black people. I'm going to ask the HOD to respond there, as well as the team to respond on the expanded unemployment figures. Honourable Murray, on the SSEG and wheeling, so those are two different projects that we're working on. The one is a small-scale embedded generation, and ideally we'd like to see the landscape of our province's roofs change dramatically from, to be able to see solar panels on roofs wherever we go, because that provides to take strain off the grid, but it also means that It helps with energy resilience and an opportunity for any excess power to be put back into the grid. Already, the City of Cape Town has incentivized SSEG for businesses, and they get a feed-in compensation for the energy that they put back into the grid. And so, as work on this develops, the more these projects will be able to roll out, and perhaps even we'll see the same for residential households. Then, looking at wheeling, wheeling is very important in the bigger picture, because what it allows is for energy to be produced in one area and then wheeled across the grid, theoretically to another area where the consumers are. And so the MER project is helping 7 candidate municipalities in the province to develop wheeling frameworks and tariffs associated with that wheeling. It is a very complex area, and the City of Cape Town and George are running pilots at the moment to help with the sort of back-end systems, because it requires very robust accounting systems to be able to support wheeling. The 7 municipalities are Bergrivier, Cape Agulhas, Drakensberg, George, Overstrand, Saldanha, and Stellenbosch. Then to your question, Chair, on the harbours, we understand that the port can be a significant bottleneck in the economy, so we've done a lot of work there. The Department of Economic Development and Tourism has a dedicated project manager that works with the entire logistics value chain surrounding the port to try and increase efficiencies in the port. So, for example, we've been doing a lot of research around the port. A truck booking system has been established to help with truck congestion in the port. We've engaged with exporters, trade forwarders, etc. So, for example, the port is working 24 hours a day, 364 days a year, with the exception of Workers' Day. And we've encouraged exporters to use nighttime shifts at the port, because there is availability. So instead of having bottlenecks during the day, there is an opportunity to make use of the harbour at nighttime. We've also been engaging with shipping lines to share the efficiencies that have been reached more recently, and definite improvements at the port. So, for example, in 6 out of the 8 last weeks, ships have arrived to berth within 1 day, which is a very good metric. Of course, the 2 weeks were the cold front that prevented that the earlier or the berthing of those vessels. And then, of course, in August, the port achieved a record of 19,500 TEUs moved in the port. So there are efficiencies. However, this needs to continue and also increase. And the only way to do that is through increased investment in the port and the infrastructure of the port. And ideally, we'd like to see that with public sector participation, private sector participation, I beg your pardon. Right, I'll hand over to the team for the remainder of those questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question in terms of the agricultural sector transformation in terms of ownership, I'll ask the team to talk about what data there is actually available. But I do know that our Black Farmer or Emerging Farmer Support Program has been comparatively very successful in the Western Cape. I'm just not sure, I don't have the data with me on the scale of that, and obviously the journey of transformation there is really quite significant journey still to happen. I'll ask the team, Roy, to speak to the actual figures on unemployment, expanded definitions as well. Honourable Mbimbi, on your question on public sector jobs, that is captured in terms of the category is, I think, community and social services jobs. Those are by and large all public sector jobs, but the team can correct me if I got my terminology wrong on the statistical category. So they are captured in that respect. Honourable Chair, your questions on the Gini coefficient for other provinces, I think the team can just cover that one. And then on the condition of the roads, what the province actually has is a road asset management program and a plan that generates a rather weighty doorstopper of a document, I think every year or every second year, but which reviews the condition of each road segment across the province that's in the domain of that's the responsibility of the provincial government. There's then underneath that, and that assesses condition according to criteria that are laid down by pre-specified criteria that would then lead to those categories on page 36, fair, poor, whatever. The underpinning that then is a decision algorithm that assists in programming the sequence and scale of investment in different segments of road in the most efficient manner. And so in our road spending every year, we draw from the road asset management plan and that underlying investment model that suggests which road sections of the network need to be upgraded to maintain them either an equal or improved level. And so there's a lot of data that goes into it. It's quite an intensive and pretty professional exercise. Obviously, what one's trying to do in that circumstances, if you're filling in potholes, you're addressing the symptom, not the cause. So you need to kind of avoid that to the extent possible, because then already your tarmac or your surface is deteriorated to a point that you've probably eroded the road base as well. So that's the core target of our ramp, as they call it. That is available online at the Department of Transport and Public Works' website. If you're interested in getting into the very technical detail of it as well. But let me hand over then, I think, to Roy and the team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to members. I'm a bit worried there's supposed to be a debate about the causes of growth being so low at the moment, and unfortunately, I think we all agree that it's energy. So it's rare to have so many economists agree on one thing, and I think it goes directly to the point that is exactly how we go forward. And I think that has really been a big focus of obviously the provincial government and all the initiatives around there. Having taken the easy question, I'm going to hand over to the team for the more difficult questions on unemployment and inequality. They'll give you a brief breakdown of the statistics there.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Looking at unemployment, the expanded definition for unemployment is obviously the official unemployment, but including discouraged workers. Any other reason for the employer not looking for work. And that number is, we're looking for a number. The question was, it's 1,065,000 for quarter 2, 2022. That's the number of unemployed in expanded definition. It grew by 126,000 from quarter 1. So 1,065,000 is the exact number of unemployed. An expanded definition for the Western Cape. Just on the question of the Gini coefficient, referring to page 81 in the PERA, the national Gini coefficient number is 0.635, and that's against the Western Cape Gini coefficient number of 0.625. Thank you. Page 81. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, on the issue of land ownership in agriculture, there's not much statistics that I'm aware of available, but according to the 2017 Census of Commercial Agriculture, and I'm talking on memory here, the non-white people in the Western Cape is about 12% of all commercial farms in the Western Cape. And then on the land ownership, that is actually a core mandate of the national government. So the provincial government will support farms to be successful. And it's actually a key challenge for farmers, since many of them do not own the property, they can't get loans. So yeah, that remains one of the issues. And then on the labor stats, the government sector is in the community services sector. It's thrown in with community services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any hands? Do you see any? Member from Kontline now has a hand. Okay, there's no other hands online. Member Kontline can go ahead, and then Member Plato.
No, Thank you, Chair. I think my last one on this round, and thank you for the responses earlier on. I just wanted to say that maybe, Chair, we may want, as a committee, to really request an engagement or presentation on the fiscal futures, so that we can try and understand, the work that is going on in that space. And I'm raising, Chair, as you would know, which is some of the things that I think you have been consistent in allowing the FFC in particular to share with us their insights, because I think part of what for me is important to gauge is the extent to which we are thinking differently about issues of revenue, whether it's collections, taxes, and all of that, including spending. Because somewhere, somehow, and we know, we've got a challenge of institutional flexibility of government, markets, and if we're not responding, because it seems every time, we speak of trying to depart from the problems that the entire trajectory is placing us. But when we listen to what the data is telling us and how we are responding, it seems we are really taking so much long a time to be responsive. And I think the crisis that we're going to get into is really not to be as dynamic as data is dictating. And I'm raising this particularly because that's why my excitement around the fiscal futures, because I really want us, particularly from a budgeting point of view, to be able to have conversations that are helping us with the role that we have, to consider how the money is spent wisely. Where could we make the relevance? So I'm just asking for that, Chair, and that's why I'm making reference to the Fiscal Commission, because it has presented, I think, a number of areas that I think it is trying to ring the bell to Parliament and others around how I think government is spending or is actually putting together how it collects revenue. That's one issue I wanted to make as a suggestion. And then, Chair, the second one, whilst I'm hearing this notion of being data driven, if once again it is not going to help us to make the requisite decisions properly, and we're going to take time and take an approach of a gentleman's agreement, we're going to have challenges. And I'm raising this because MEC, you would recall, you were a chair of the ad hoc committee. One of the things we learned during COVID is trying to make decisions and moving away from these compartments of ourselves as governments. So somewhere, somehow, for me, I'm really, if we talk about this data from Pero and from Mero, do we need regulation to get ourselves, to speak to data? Because I'm just thinking, if indeed from the administrative side of things, here is data telling, but the extent to which we move, because local government, and I'm not making the assumption because I do not have the evidence at this point, that is why I was asking the tool, but I'm just saying, if data from the Mero is saying this to a particular municipality, my interest is that that data must then at least demonstrate to me that indeed the municipality, is trying to respond. So I'm asking the question, do we need regulation? Is our intergovernmental relations not enough to help us get to that point? Because I don't think we can afford the gentleman's agreement. We can't. Talking to this sphere of government and that other one, this talking, I think is what is leading to social unrest. Because when all is said and done, people don't understand this notion that this is national government. It's something that we've got luxury to understand amongst ourselves. So I'm saying we need, as we did during COVID, we're able to speak to each other against these compartments. So what do we do at this point when we've got a challenge of economic growth? And this is one issue, including the conversation spaces. Here we're asking Treasury. Some of the things are more economic development under your portfolio around planning and frameworks. For me, I think that is just my anxiety, HOD, is to sit on this other side of things and be watching a movie, on this one hand, that where you get evidence that, there's fire, but it's like we're in a conversation that is just, trying to reflect about that fire instead of acting, with such urgency. So perhaps it's something, Minister, that in your conversations in cabinet and all of that, we really need to find ourselves moving with what the data is telling, so that we don't just politicize about data. If indeed we are data driven, let at least be seen being moving in that. So it's more a comment, Chair, than anything. That is why I'm saying I'm not sure whether at this point we need a regulation to get to that point, or our intergovernmental is just not helping at this point. But safe to say, I think we shall have to monitor. I think this conversation on jobs. I think, I do not know, maybe it may not necessarily be a conversation here in the budget committee. Perhaps it's a conversation, Minister, that must move into the economic development. I'm not sure at what point or where is it being coordinated, but somewhere, somehow, maybe, Minister, you can advise, is there a, I don't know, I know government talks about war rooms, all of these nice concepts. I'm not sure, is there a war room on job creation, and the plans that we're having? If we were to ask for a dashboard, of where do we go for oversight and say, okay, these are the plans, this is what is coming, where can we see that, so that the ideas that are being shared here, we can be able to follow them up and track them. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Just briefly from my side, looking at page 10 under your key findings, you're making the critical statement or point that we need to view unemployment differently. We understand that unemployment in South Africa is in a crisis. Couple that to job creation and food security, other social illnesses that goes along with that. I would love, and I'm glad to see that agriculture, you regard agriculture at least as a highlight. Agriculture is the backbone of the Western Cape economy, likewise in other countries as well. And on our visit to Brazil, it was quite interesting to note that out of a population of 216 million people, their unemployment figure is around 15 plus minus %. The question is, how are they getting that right? And one of the issues we pick up immediately on the tour is the emphasis on agriculture. Starting at a young age at primary school level, making agriculture as a subject part of the curriculum, even high school level, college level and that sort of thing. And that is something we miss in this country. The message is that you in South Africa got all the necessary levers, like land, but you don't use your levers. That is what the Brazilians put it to us. And that is something we can learn from that. The love of the land and that sort of a thing, and even to resolve the land crisis we experience and people asking for land. So I understand you can't just want to take people, put them on land and make of them farmers and they have never farmed in their life before. But I think with a longer term, we need to start somewhere with regard to educating the young to fend for themselves when they're older, when they are leaving school and that sort of thing, with provision of land so that they can produce for the market. Sitting in hotels and restaurants in Sao Paulo, from the one restaurant and hotel to the other, and also talking to government officials, it was quite evident to learn that the fruit and the vegetables in the restaurants and hotels is coming from urban farmers, not even commercial farmers. So urban farming in the South, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, those countries is huge. With all the land in South Africa, in the Western Cape, the whole of the country, I'm not sure if we're using our land optimally for the market and to put many, many more of our unemployed people in employment. Is this something we need to look into? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to ask one last tiny question on page 46. I'm sorry for making you explain lots of graphs. I just want to make sure that when I go do my bedtime reading that I'm interpreting the graph correctly. Figure 2.16. It says here that the state revenue from wine products exceeded the producer's income in South Africa in the past decade. Now, in my mind, when you make an income as a producer, you can almost now give more money to the state than what you're making. So if I can just get an understanding, I think I'm reading this graph completely wrong. If I could just get an understanding of the fact that the state's income, the state received 7.2 billion rand from excise duty and VAT tax revenue. Okay, it says then the tax revenue was 9.2% more than wine producers' revenue, which was 6.6 billion in the same year. So if I could just get an understanding so that when I go later and read this chapter on agriculture, that I'm sure that I'm on the same WhatsApp group as Provincial Treasury. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the members. Honourable Nkondlo would be very happy to brief the Committee on Fiscal Futures. And we've noted your comments on using the data, which are very important. And in fact, it's a strong requirement for the policy leads for job safety and well-being to show how they've engaged and used the data in the MTBPC process. So certainly from the provincial level, there is strong moves to engage with the data as we move into the sort of policy decisions that will inform the budget. Honourable Plato, your questions on Brazil. We haven't really used Brazil as one of the sort of benchmarks. There are some indicators here, especially on fixed capital assets, but I don't know if perhaps the team have more insights there. And then I'm going to phone a friend on the wine revenue.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, absolutely welcome the engagement on fiscal futures, and Dr. Hardman can just give us a teaser on where we are in the process. I think that it's precisely what we're trying to build with the fiscal futures is more of a practical dialogue around the data on to get the big systems of government aligned to make a difference, to make change, rather than to, as you say, I think we share that frustration, hovering around, seeing a known problem. It's kind of like the energy crisis feels like we've known about this since 2008. Why are we here? What are we not seeing in the data? And there's so many of those other challenges in South Africa these are the stories of people's real lives, and that we really need to get focused on changing the trajectory of travel rather than repeating the narrative. There is, as the Minister says, a big focus on making sure, certainly in the province, we learn how people are responding to the evidence. And if they can't put the evidence down on the table, then it's not just great ideas that need to be leading the policy-making process. And I think you're seeing that coming out most publicly in the sort of health terrain, because some of that health data is leading from COVID is now reaching into other communicable diseases and so forth. But that really is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's actually happening in the province on data. Just some of it, it's not yet probably ready to be in that dashboard staged in the public domain. There's terrifically important education data that's available, and so many other sources of data that really do need to be driving a debate forward. The Honourable Plato, quite right. We hope the data challenges us to look at the problems very differently, because, like I think Honourable Nkondlo was saying earlier, when we look at the unemployment data, we start to realize that parts of the labor market are where the key of the dysfunction happens, that young people. And we look at that relative to the education data, and there's some inconsistencies. We've got very high rates of access, but quite low education outcomes and low conversion rates into jobs. But is it just a lack of skills that are causing the constraints in our labor in employment? And the answer is not unequivocally yes. That's the only thing you need to fix, and everything else will be fine. There are other things that we need to fix in order to convert a learner into an employed person with a career, whenever they're working. Likewise, I take your comment to mean let's also view land differently as well. If you look at the way land is viewed in other parts of the world, we have a very particular pattern in South Africa and in the sort of British colonial system of understanding land ownership. That's not the same, I would suspect, in Brazil, although I can't say that I'm a specialist in land ownership in Latin America. But I would suspect that some of the tenure rules and arrangements, some of the zoning rules and arrangements, and so forth, are also enabling factors for the types of agricultural output that they get and where they get it. So it's really how you put that basket of measures together, put the pieces of the puzzle together in different ways, will give you a different outcome. But an interesting set of questions. So if I can then hand over to Dr. Haverman on the fiscal futures for just a very, very high level teaser on that. And then I'm not sure who wants to take on Honourable Bartman's question on page 46, figure 260. Philippus will take it on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we're very excited to come and present on fiscal futures. What we did in the last, I think it was in the MTBS or the budget, is we gave the first phase of that project where we did the scenario analysis. So overlay the different scenarios for how the economy will grow over the next 3 to 5 years. And the impact of that is obviously that if the economy comes right and there's a huge boom in the economy, then we can expect substantially more transfers from national government down to the provincial government, increased tax revenue from gambling and from liquor license fees, etc., and from motor vehicle license fees, which is a big area of income for us. But on the other hand, if the economy does very badly, then we'll probably see substantially less provincial receipts for us. So that kind of gives you the sense of the top part of the fiscal futures, which is sort of where we'll get our money from. And then obviously on the expenditure side, the different scenarios for what might happen over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. We could see substantially more in-migration into the province than what we're experiencing at the moment, which would put more pressure on the healthcare system and the education system. So we'd have to find resources for that, or for other reasons we may see less in-migration. So it's kind of like you say, a scenario planning exercise. You look at all the different things. You look at what might happen on revenues, what might happen on expenditures, depending on changes, expected changes to the economic growth and to demographic growth. On the point about, just to give you a practical example, so for us, since Malcolm and I drive around the whole province and try and see every single municipality during our oversight visits, the municipalities do use this data for their own purposes, but a very important part of the MERO and the use of this data is actually for our own planning as a province, is that, for example, you can see that population growth in Bateau is very, very strong, and partly as a result of in-migration, also parts of Drakenstein, Witzenberg, population growth there is much faster than in the rest of the province. And that makes us think a lot about where should we put the next set of schools, where should we put the hospitals, et cetera, and that goes directly into the planning cycle for the Department of Education, the Department of Health, but also obviously for the municipalities. So, we had a visit, for example, to Overstrand, and they've got a whole plan for how they're dealing with rapid population growth in Hermanus. And the province is working with them to make sure we have the roads and the hospitals and the schools, etc. And then also within the city, different parts of the city are growing at different rates. So that's kind of a practical way that this data goes directly into planning.
Honourable Bartman. Yeah, on the wine tax, it is the statistics is correct. It is possible because the tax is on sales or turnover versus the producer's income would be their net income. If you buy a bottle of wine in a restaurant, the tip to the waiter is also for that bottle more than what the producer get in net profit.
So the tax is not just on when you make it, it's on the whole process, which is why it's higher than the producer income. Okay, cool. Same WhatsApp group. Dankie baie. Members, any urgent questions before we go over to the first quarterly performance feedback from the Department of the Premier? If none, I would like to thank the Minister and the Provincial Treasury for the work you've done. As always, it is a world-class document. If you have even read a few pages, you can see the detail and that has gone into this document and how in depth you've gone in analyzing what is happening in our provincial economy. And it is up to us, legislatures, to look at this evidence and data and to ask ourselves a difficult question: how are we going to use this information to make decisions going forward? And that's a difficult question that as politicians we also have to deal with. But we thank you for being able to put this data and evidence before us so that we are able to make that type of decision. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. It is not necessary, but you are always welcome. But you're welcome to go about your day-to-day activities. Thank you so much. Colleagues, please do stay in the chamber and online as we have not concluded the business of the committee for the day. We still have the quarterly performance report, and we will also consider our report on the deliberations on payroll. And as you usually know, that we usually just basically table our respective report and we've deliberated on the matter, and from there committees are welcome to analyze the data and evidence going further. There's also some feedback that I have for everyone at the end of the meeting. And I concur with Member Nkonto. I'm very happy to bring fiscal futures before us. I have lots of questions when it comes to revenue generation in our province and in South Africa as well. So I would love to engage on that. With that, Department of the Premier. Apologies, any closing remarks?
Chair, if I may just make an introductory remark while the team gets ready to present. You will recall that in the tabling of the 2022 MTEF, we talked about an effort to provide better integration and elevation of the data that was presented to the Budget Committee. And so there's been quite a lot of quite difficult work that's been done, although, and you're going to start to see a very different quarterly report starting from now. It's not a complete picture yet, because some of the data streams are still being aligned and so forth. But in the past, you'd see a few tables. You're now going to see a much deeper breakdown, both in terms of performance information and in terms of the financial information, and stronger efforts to integrate those two data sets. It's not the end of the road of where we're going here, but it is, I think, a significant advance. That was my first point, is that that promised change is already in motion. Obviously, the Q1 data is always, I liken it to sort of peering through the fog. It's the first data point of a year. So that's why the focus has been on what the underlying mechanics of this of the reforms that we're starting to introduce are. So you're definitely going to be seeing that come through. It is a relatively lengthy presentation. I've asked the team to keep it quite short. But we do want to give you a real flavor of the effort that is underway, because it's a colossal, these are very big data sets. So it's quite a colossal effort as well. But I'll hand over to them with that, those disclaimers.
That if there is information that has now been updated due to the payroll. You can just indicate that and the page numbers, because otherwise we're also then just dealing with old information.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. So as the HUD indicated in terms of when we were last year, we indicated about this reporting reform journey that we're on. And the emphasis is in terms of that this is a journey. So for Q1, we indicated to you in terms of the different phases is the fact that we are looking at first deepening of information on the performance side. So you'll see in terms of what's new in terms of this report. Before we only used to indicate you what APP targets they were. Now we are indicating also what is now targets that's set in the provincial strategic implementation plan that hasn't been presented before to the budget committee. And so we're looking at the integration now of APP information and targets, and in terms of some of the reporting that is outside of the APP, that we're trying to bring that together. In this presentation. And then from the financial information, there's two key areas that we're wanting to provide you more information on. That is compensation of employees and in terms of infrastructure. And this is all in terms of what we are working towards in terms of trying to improve and provide information to assist oversight, then also to improve the system of accountability. But we have the end goal in mind. And so what we're trying to do is create an institutional view for committees, which they can use. And for us then also as a Western Cape government, we're building every quarter towards an annual performance card of the Western Cape government. So one of the changes that you'll see in terms of how we've also flipped the presentation around. And so we're looking at in terms of what have we achieved in terms of performance, and then we're looking at in terms of how we then used the financial resources to achieve those targets. So Ms. Zinat Ismail from Department of the Premier is going to kick us off on the performance information.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So for 2022-23 first quarter performance data. Let me see. Yeah. So following from the previous discussion on a very much on a provincial level now, also if one look at what's happening in the province, and then one can see for this quarter, this financial year, as we know, it was turbulent in terms of what's happening globally. Fuel and food prices have also risen steeply, and that impact obviously on our CPI, and that's our due to our inflation. But very much the Western Cape has not been immune to. We had previous discussions now alluded to fuel and food prices, very much our unemployment rate, and we've spoken earlier on around our narrow definition and our expanded definition, and as at the end of June 2022, our narrow definition, our unemployment rate is standing at 27.5% in terms of percentage. The earlier speaker spoke about in terms of numbers. And then we also look at our crimes, and our SAPS data speak about the number of murders reported for the period April to June 2022, which is also quite glaring. So coming then institutionally. Oops, sorry, I am. So when one look at institutionally, so what is happening in the Western Cape government, our 13 departments, our public entities, and what are we measuring and what are we chasing? So this slide actually just summarized the first quarter release that we have issued in terms of the targets or the indicators that we are measuring. So interesting to note, there's about 804 performance indicators that we are actually measuring for the year in our tabled APPs. And in addition, across the provincial entities, there's about 156 performance indicators. Interesting to note, in our provincial strategic implementation plan, there is 134 performance indicators. Of that, very much 40 is on outcome level. Speaking about socioeconomic trends and so forth, and then what's happening in our across our institutions. There's about 94 performance indicators, and that just gives you an overview and a snapshot of the system of indicators, what we are measuring in the quarter on quarter. So very much in terms of jobs, safety and well-being, and I'm just going to highlight a few because this discussion was very interesting earlier on, and I'm not going to go into it, but here we're speaking about that quarter on quarter, we're tracking the gross domestic product growth, the number of, also the number of people employed, not only unemployment, and then we go into safety, as we know, murder rate, that's a key indicator that we're tracking for safety, and well-being very much in the education space, and then also looking at not only our own education data, but also what is done by other outside data producers. So very much in line with the earlier discussion, how do we actually bring our data producers and our users and our consumers, because Western Cape government is part of a broader data ecosystem, in how we're using that data to make critical decisions for budgetary policy making. So overview of our delivery trends. This slide just shows that for the across the Western Cape government, we had tracked 324 out of 407 targets. We had an average of 80% achievement, and for the public entities, 64 out of 78 targets and an average of 82%. According to our clusters, you could see there's the average of what each cluster have achieved, governance, social and economic. This slide just gives a little depiction of what I actually said earlier, and I know I'm going a little fast in terms of time. This slide actually shows us in terms of our, just the blue line actually shows our Western Cape government average, as I said earlier on, and then and you could see the number of departments that actually achieving above that the blue line, and the departments that actually have achieved below the blue line. Okay, and now we're going to the entities. Here we could see again the blue line actually showing us our the average in terms of 82% there, and the number of departments achieving above and below. And then one look at the overview of our indicators in our OPP that actually specifically zoom into what we are measuring in terms of jobs and safety and well-being. And interesting to note, for this quarter, 211 of that 394 indicators were reported on. And on average, if one look at our EPP targets for the Provincial Strategic Implementation Plan, the linked, it's 71%. So if we want to look at jobs, and you could see there that's 65% were those departments, agriculture and transport and public works, were the biggest contributions to jobs. Yes, definitely in the skills program and agriculture support initiatives. They want to look at safety. One can see that the biggest contributor, it is community safety and Department of Social Development. One look at well-being, biggest contributors is health and actually also social development and innovation and culture. We're looking at Department of the Premier and Treasury. So that is just the graphical depiction, and there one could actually see the bar chart again in terms of the average and departments below it. We're taking the other side of the coin, and one look at the narrative story of what we and how we have across the Western Cape government have performed on job safety and well-being. And then one can see that the print is a little small, but one can see in terms of treasury, very much the focus on e-procurement, in local government, on Thusang centers, Department of Environmental Affairs, they work on the environmental impact assessments, GCAS, very much the library services, and the education around the library and in library services, and then in health, go back to the indicators around immunization and the work that they are doing in terms of pregnant women and the antenatal visits. And then one look at education, one look at the ECD centers that have been supported. In terms of docs, well, I'm very much familiar with the LEAP program, the Law Enforcement Advancement Plan, and then the Forensic Pathology Service in terms of road traffic accidents. And that very much we spoke earlier around how data and evidence are being used, the Department of Health's data, the forensic pathology data is being used also to report on the road accidents. And the safety dashboard is also updated and to keep the stakeholders informed, right, for decision making. And then one also look at docs is about long-standing program in terms of the neighborhood watch structures, and also they work with the Western Cape Liquor Authority 54 enforcement operations. And then we spoke earlier on around agriculture, very much in terms of the agriculture skills program. Food security and food gardening was also finding traction, agro-processing support. When one look at the Department of Social Development, one could see obviously the focus on the children, also the other side of the coin in terms of safety and crime, in terms of children assessed to be at risk, and also in terms of the provision of psychological support. When one look at DDAT, it goes back to, one go to DDAT, it goes back to the discussion on jobs and their role in jobs, and also on the red tape reduction unit, focusing on tourists, and very much also on the green economy, and then when looking at the entity support in terms of Westgrow, then one look at the investment promotion, and then also the that's the investment in jobs. And then finally, when one look at also jobs, transport and public works, then it's also the employment, the EPW program, and very much institutional already in the department, and also they focus on safety. So what are the key take-home points? And I'm quite aware I've went through it quite fast or in brief. But in terms of integrating performance across the 13 departments and the entities, this report, as Annalise have actually alluded to earlier, is the first joint release for Q1 as part of our performance data reform journey to expand on. We're talking about deepening, but also expanding on performance data. This release provides the Budget Committee with quarterly outcomes for the province in terms of that performance indicators. So it provides that first overall view of performance, and towards further streamlining and integration with the non-financial performance. But very much the consumption of this release is to build on an annual performance report card for the province, and that is where we further want to deepen the performance data. But it's also important for the Budget Committee to note that the socioeconomic trends cannot be seen in isolation of the broader socioeconomic trends and the broader discussion that we actually, interesting discussion that we had earlier on. And then the performance indicators and how Western Cape government deliver, that should also be seen in terms of what are our contribution towards what the data tells us in our socioeconomic trends, job safety and well-being, and also the socioeconomic dynamics, what's happening in the province and nationally and globally. I hand over to Annelies.
So moving on from the performance data, we're now looking at in terms of, as I said, the financial resources. So what financial resources and how have the departments and entities used their financial resources to actually produce those outputs. So for the first quarter, in terms of what we're indicating is the fact that on average, departments have spent 22.8% of their budget. At the end of the first quarter, we're not showing any risk at this stage, fiscal risk. The projected over expenditure that you see there of about 127 million, majority of that is projected within health. Now, the health is in terms of some of the data that was coming through, in terms of looking at the impact of the reintroduction of clinical skills that was scaled down during COVID. So obviously now mainstreaming COVID, and then in terms of going back in terms of that service delivery platform and looking at those backlogs, some of the data that is coming through is showing this kind of trend. So within the management team, and this is really in program 2 within health, they are looking at in terms of trying to analyze that data even further, but also looking at the overall health platform, not only isolating that to program 2. But because in the Western Cape, we have a very good track record. I think everyone knows that in terms of fiscal discipline. So for us in the first quarter is to look at what is behind those numbers, because we're not showing necessarily any fiscal risk at that stage. But what are the departments facing when they were implementing their budget from the 1st of April? Now, so the first 4 contexts, when you see on the context column over there, in terms of governance, refresh, wage agreement, and the growing demand for services, when we were putting our 2022 budgets together, we actually knew that these were some of the risks that we were actually covering in terms of the 2022 budget. So if you remember, in terms of from a governance perspective, we had in terms of the supply chain, the court case, constitutional court case on supply chain that gave in terms of the beginning of this financial year, just some uncertainty in terms of the supply chain. And that was some of the things the department had to adapt to, and that they need to reprioritize and they need to adjust accordingly into the first quarter. Same with refresh. We knew that we were going to start in terms of looking at, in terms of refresh and start establishing those departments. But at the same time, we have 2 departments that also need to implement in the current financial year. So we knew that. With the wage agreement, we knew that we did not finalize the 22-23, the current year's wage agreement, when we finalized the budget. And so we have some information, and I'll go into the detail where that's concerned. We always knew that there was growing demands in terms of the increase in the population into the Western Cape and what that was having on the social, especially on our social departments. And you'll see on the next slide just some of the impacts. And then in terms of what the departments did not know when we put the budget together, but it did hit them in the first quarter in terms of decision making. And that is what we've also been discussing now in terms of the PERO. That is in terms of the load shedding, and actually the extent of the load shedding, no one has been prepared for when they put their 2022 budgets together. That does put impact in terms of fuel costs, and the kind of, especially those who have a service delivery model in terms of fuel costs and in terms of generators and so on that is required. So we have departments that have started to indicate to us that they were spending in the 80s and 90% of their budget as at in the first quarter already on their fuel, for example. So they were registering it but not showing at that stage over expenditure. Also then in terms of we put inflation here, because remember when we were putting the budget together, the budget assumption for inflation was 4.2%. And we know that's not what's happening. So what's facing the departments for the 1st of April is a complete different picture when we're putting the budget together. And so we're wanting to also indicate that this is the complexities that departments are needing and accounting officers are needing to make decisions on as they were going through the first quarter. And so in terms of on the impact on the social sector, education, they've indicated to us the learner growth, and you'll see in terms of how they're reacting to the learner growth when we get to the COE numbers, because you need teachers for extra students, for example. And then also we know this is the first year that they're taking up the early childhood development, that shift, that's a risk that they need to manage and they need to stay on top of. In terms of health and what is coming through health in the first quarter is the escalating of the mental health and the burden that is actually having in terms of on the health platform, but there are also signs of malnutrition that's coming through in the health platform, and then also in terms of increased incidents in the first quarter obviously on violence. I mean, we've seen some of the statistics already on that. And then when we're now reintroducing the health platform in terms of its services, we now in terms of seeing that there's the re-escalating of the critical services also then impacts as they mainstreaming COVID. So it's a combination, all of this that is impacted in terms of the first quarter for health. And like I indicated, the department has indicated to us and our bilateral engagements is that they are hoping that from the second and the third quarter, the data that they are getting, that they're going to start feeding that into that in terms of the projections and going forward. What does that actually mean then for health? In terms of going forward. We're also seeing, you'll see that social development is showing also some spending pressure. They spend above the 22.8% average provincial spend, and that is mainly in terms of two areas. One is in terms of, we've seen in terms of the NPO sector, and the NPOs are closing down. That does impact in terms of increasing the service burden for the department. But then on the other side, obviously with that, there is an impact then on the social workers for that matter as well. And so they also now having a critical shortage on social workers to respond in terms of what they're facing. In infrastructure, in terms of what we're seeing there is in terms of in human settlements, in terms of the inability to unlock affordable housing opportunities. We're looking at poor contractor performance in the first quarter, and then also vandalism and land invasions that is facing the infrastructure projects on the ground, which then obviously impacts in terms of the dates, in terms of the planning dates going forward. In terms of the other costs that's impacting departments, in terms of increase in the municipal service rates, again, that's higher than what is budgeted for. And then also the public transport system, this also impacts in terms of transport and public works. Some of the headlines we saw, and some in terms of the violence and the tax on buses that has happened in the first quarter, all impacting service delivery and decisions in the department. So this is what's happening behind the numbers. And we're trying to reflect that to you in first quarter. So one of the focus areas for the year, because we indicated when we went into the 2022 budget, COE was a risk for us because we have not finalized our COE negotiations, our wage negotiations. And so for us, in terms of where that wage negotiations stand at this stage, there's been a 3% salary increase that was offer that's been made on our calculation that would cost about 985 million for us as a province. We do not have that money, and we've indicated that to National already. And that's why, and that's also why it's red, Chair, because, and we have indicated both to the presidency and to the National Minister of Finance that is not affordable for us as a province. I mean, that is in terms of about 2,100 social frontline workers that will be impacted in terms of our calculation. But then we're also very much interested, and we're wanting to also to provide some information to you in terms of what that COE story is every quarter. And so in terms of what we're showing you here is the fact that there's a net effect. So we spent 24% of our COE budget, but what does that mean in headcount for ourselves? So at the net increase, decrease for us as a province is from the 1st of April to the 30th of June, we had a loss of 24 in terms of headcount.
but that varies across all the departments, and it is very dependent on the recruitment strategy. And then also noting that with COE, this is a snapshot. And so in terms of the recruitment process, it's still happening throughout the financial year. So part of our COE strategy is a bespoke strategy. So there's not a COE strategy that indicates to everybody that this is in terms of how you need to budget for your COE. Each of the departments have their own COE budget strategy. They also have indicated in terms of the targets that they've set for themselves in headcount, but also in terms of agreed upon limits within the COE. And so for the first quarter, like I indicated, there's a decrease of 24, but then there's also service delivery pressures, as I indicated from the previous slide, and we have part of the departments that's indicating to us that there are pockets of burnout in terms of some of the frontline services, social workers being one of them. And so the increases that you see there, the majority in terms of education, this is now responding to that learner growth. So you see 633 more teachers, and then also in health, this is now responding in terms of the reduction of COVID now on the health sector, and then also how health actually manages their budget as well, which is unique really to this province, and assists us in our fiscal discipline for us as a province. Then in terms of overall infrastructure, this is also then where we want to also give you a bit more information. And in terms of what you can see there, we spent about 16% of our budget. You can also see in terms of which of the departments have shown in terms of above spending where the average is concerned. There are key challenges. I've mentioned some of them in infrastructure already, and that mainly is in terms of delayed in procurement. I mentioned that up front in the first quarter that did create in terms of uncertainty, but then also in terms of there is poor performance in terms of contractors and professional service providers. So what some of the responses has been in terms of reprioritizing projects as a response, and then also in terms of various departments acting now against non-performing contractors earlier than what would have done perhaps in the past. So some of the detail then in terms of from the department, you'll see why we're also reflecting on infrastructure for you, because if you compare the 1 year to the previous year to the current financial year, you'll see that there's R1 billion extra in the infrastructure budget when you compare the two financial years, and that's why we also wanted to give you a deep dive of some of the information in terms of the infrastructure and therefore the implementation of these projects going forward. So some of the projects that we're indicating to you, so when we were tabling the 2022 budget, and for the last 2 years, you will remember in terms of we were also emphasizing what is important in the infrastructure, because you have in terms of multi-year projects is the project pipeline. So you'll also remember that we then also put in terms of project preparation facility fund together to assist departments in terms of putting a credible project pipeline together. So here we're giving you some information on what that project pipeline actually looks like. So for the first quarter, there's 585 projects in the infrastructure realm. Then in terms of where they find themselves in the different stages of infrastructure. So majority of them you find in terms of 51%, that's mainly in terms of projects that's in your planning phase, your project initiation, feasibility and design and tender phase. So that's where you're finding the majority of the projects. And then approximately 26% is in construction phase and 7% is in practical or final or completion phase for the first quarter. And then there is in terms of 16% then makes up in terms of what we call package programs, and that is mainly in terms of health technology projects in terms of purchasing technology for the various facilities. And then also we've provided at the back of the presentation some project status per sector as well that you can see. So you ask them what is significance, what is this pie chart, how do you actually also interpret this? So then if you see in terms of
if you have majority of your projects in your planning phase, your pre-feasibility phase and design phase, it then also gives opportunities when you need to reprioritize projects that you can actually then move some of those faster than what was planned if in a construction phase you're having some of the problems on the ground, as we mentioned. So that's one of the things. What we're wanting to give you is in terms of, again, it is project pipeline, and I'm almost finished, Chair. Don't know if you can just go. Infrastructure SA, next one. No. Just keeping a slide. Did I miss it? It's freezing. Oh, okay. Probably knows I'm in a hurry. All right, so let me go on here in terms of just to indicate to you what we're wanting to give next quarter in terms of, and we also would like some feedback from the committee in terms of if this information is of use. So next quarter we're wanting to give you in quarter 2, we want to give you the infrastructure reporting model, what is called the IRM. So where you see in terms of this as an example of education, and where you see in terms of those plus signs, those are drop-down boxes. And those drop-down boxes will then give you the projects that will make up maintenance. It will give you the projects for education that make up upgrading. So we think that this is also going to assist in terms of the oversight, and we're looking at including this as your source pack of information in terms of infrastructure going forward, just in terms of some of the evolving journey that we're on regarding deepening information. So the next slide then also then looks at the project pipeline, and here we want to share with you with Infrastructure South Africa. So this is in terms of through the presidency, in terms of the project pipeline, in terms of the future projects that we are looking at, and these are your bigger projects that in terms of have a very long lead time. And so for us in the Western Cape, we have accessed have worked with the Infrastructure South Africa. We have a very good relationship that we've been working towards, both, and this is in terms of multi-sectoral, so a few departments within the province, but at the stage within Infrastructure South Africa, for the Western Cape, not only the Western Cape, the Western Cape government, but for the Western Cape province, there's 62 projects, of which 48 is from the public sector and 14 is from the private sector. And then also the value of these projects is about 312 billion rand at this stage, and there's various phases in which these projects are. As you can see, the registration of those projects, those are the Western Cape government project that has been registered at this stage, and the full business cases that is sitting with Infrastructure South Africa for funding, those 5 that you see there is also Western Cape government projects at this stage. So we're also giving you a lens in terms of forward-looking where infrastructure is concerned. Then in terms of public entities at this stage, we're not showing any risk where public entities are concerned. They have spent about 21% of their budget. The projected over expenditure is not a risk in overspending for Atlantis SEZ. It relates to unspent funding of the previous financial year. And when we're looking at own revenue, then from an own revenue perspective, at this stage for the first quarter, there's also no risk that's indicated. We are starting to collect revenue closer to the trends pre-COVID. And so you'll see that the year-on-year trend is higher than last year, where both own revenue is concerned as well as taxes. Chair, that is it from our side for the first quarter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as you can see, in the meantime, I got my original mic. I just want to say before I open up for questions and answers, Ms. Smith and Ms. Ishmael, this is by far the best quarterly report that you have presented since my election in 2019. And I just want to say congratulations. You said to us, these are the things we're going to implement. You implemented them. This information useful so that we can continue to see how do we use the data. Colleagues, with that, The floor is open for questions. Member Fly, Member Nkondlo. Are there any hands online? Okay, then I'll go third after that, in that order. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I agree. It's very comprehensive and very well done. Thank you. Now I know why I didn't smile when I walked in earlier. But anyway, I just have one question, and you must help me if I'm as ek van die pad af is, if I'm off the road. But I haven't seen any numbers regarding the Children's Commissioner in here. I haven't seen, there's nothing in terms of budget, performance indicators, nothing about the Children's Commissioner in here. And it will be sitting under your department. So I'm just concerned that there's nothing here yet, or am I jumping the gun? Because I know we're going to be talking about it later on in subsequent budget meetings, but that's the one glaring omission for me. Thank you.
Member Nkondlo.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentations, ladies. For me, I think on page 24, I think it's slide 23, in my printed copy, I think on the take-home points, I think I just wanted to comment, I think for what we are asked to note, which is, I think, the 2 bullet points, which I think I agree with. I think as pointed by our earlier conversation, but I'm sure such is a function of continuous debate, because seeing the report and the socio-economic trends as indicated here, that they cannot be seen in isolation, they must be understood in the service delivery context. It's a great statement to make. The issue is its practicality. Because in looking at service delivery context in the Western Cape, one thinks of how interconnected or integrated are we, because here you are reporting on performance and performance of departments that are not sitting here, that we shall see in future conversations. And we talk of service delivery context also from a point of the citizen, which is an important element, because if you talk about service delivery, it can't be what we think that is. It has to be, also in context of the very end user, which is the citizen. So I'm just saying you are making a very important point here at a high level, but indeed it's a function of, all of those, because what an ordinary citizen in terms of performance as presented here, and what if we're to take to an ordinary citizen in the province, in the different municipalities, a different ball game. And this, I think, it's more a strategic conversation that actually continues. But indeed, I think this helps in improving towards such. And therefore, in terms of page 26 or slide 26 here, I just wanted to check the main emerging matters that you have raised here. Should I understand them as part of the overarching and strategic risks that departments would have raised in their annual reports and performance? Do they have any relationship also with what the AG would have raised, and how do you sort of pick up what you believe from a budgeting point of view is what you bring into your performance assessment perspective? And how do we balance? I think this question also comes in slide 29. This growing demand for services in the current economic climate, because I think Dr. Haverman also in your fiscal futures, I think the HOD was mentioning that one of the things that you are looking at is your compensation cost and personnel management approach that we need to take. It's a very interesting thing, because on one hand, what you are saying, and the chair was actually also flinching her eyes, that you have already communicated to National Treasury that in a slang, township slang, we call it assisi, I'm not coming, on these wage agreements. So there is that, which is the real demands of those that are personnel in the public service, whether you like it or not. You can make the determination, you can make that suggestion that says I'm not coming, but at the same time, you can't be arguing for inflation and cost, overruns that individuals, people who are in the public service, that they have to grapple with. You would be, in a way, oblivion to realities of pressures that people are sitting with. And I'm looking at this, and that's the interesting thing about what they call the VUCA world, is that on one hand, you are sitting with a particular reality, on the other hand, because you are trying to be institutionally correct, or what we term in our language, politically correct, to say wage negotiations are easy, but the fact of the matter is that I know the kind of a salary 10 years ago, that what it would have bought for you as a personnel in public service is different to what, if you talk about even the challenges of ESCOM that the chair is highly passionate about. How do we get to the balance? And this is why I'm saying, as this a report, which is very interesting, because it helps us to get to the difficult conversations that are not comfortable, but which are data-driven, not politically driven, but data-driven. Because here you are talking about what the demands of the citizens are in as far as public service and services are concerned. On the other hand, for those services to be delivered, we have not even yet brought the robots. If you talk about tech, if maybe you would say, we are going to be saved by robots. At this point, we need warm bodies. So how are we going to balance this as this is showing? So I'm grappling, Chair and the colleagues, about this, because here they are, once again, service delivery pressures have increased, needing staff and leading to pockets of burnout. That's the fact. Even from a fiscal point of view, that's a fact. What are you going to do? Or else you're going to find yourself in social unrest, because that's what people are going to do. They're actually doing it. And those that are personnel in your service delivery points, in clinics and all of that, are actually now in a risk of some of them being held hostage by citizens that are not happy and are not part of this nice conversation about ourselves that says we're not coming with wage negotiations. And somebody says, but I'm not going to work an extra hour once I'm expected to sit here because government is saying we are managing, our compensation budgets. And then I wanted to ask colleagues, as part of this, are you tracking, especially because we're talking about first quarter, there would have been environments or rollovers. Are those tracked whether actually in your negotiations with the departments have those came in, and are they helping, especially for projects that would have been delayed perhaps in the previous quarter? So it's something that I just wanted to check. My last ones, Chair, I think are around the infrastructure, because this infrastructure, once again, is very important because it's part of our job creation strategy that this report is also helping us to follow. Now, when we talk about this poor performance of contractors, I know we may not necessarily have to ask you, perhaps it will go to the, what is that department? Infrastructure department. But I wanted to just check from yourselves, is this a sudden risk? If and is it, what is the extent thereof in terms of raising it also in context of slide 32, because I'm not seeing if so, maybe they are not as significant in terms of the overall project performance. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much. I have one suggestion. Mkondo asked about project delays in that pie chart. Perhaps just include the procurement system. I don't understand, does that mean it's concluded or is it still being implemented? Also, I read that Provincial Treasury took its RFQs online, which is music to my soul. But I just want to understand, is it for all departments or is it just Provincial Treasury that took the advertising online? Because we are moving towards an online system. I know, for example, the construction industry system is majority online already. But obviously, in terms of general procurement, if we are also moving towards that. And then on slide 26, which also relates to public procurement, I wanted to find out whether there's any progress regarding the draft public procurement bill. I haven't seen it going to the National Assembly as yet. As we all know, it essentially repeals all municipal public procurement matters. It also delegates power regarding the regulations of public procurement to the minister instead of just legislating for it in terms of Section 219 of the Constitution. So if we can just get any progress in that regard. I know Provincial Treasury did make a submission to National Treasury. I'm not sure if there's been any response or any updates to that. Then Ms. Smith saw my eyes when she said 985 million rand for public wages. So my first question about do we have 985 million for wages has been answered, and the answer was no. But now my second question then in that regard is, where are you going to find 985 million rand for wages? Because if you're going to tell me borrowing, then we might as well close up shop as a province. And if the answer from National is that we're going to increase taxes, well, our people have nothing left to tax. There's VAT, there's fuel levies, there's road levies, there's income taxes, there's business taxes. Doesn't matter what type of tax you pay in this country, every single person in our country pays tax, and there's nothing left to tax. What is the international best practice in terms of a cap for public wages, and where are we at as a province? And if you perhaps, I'm not sure if you have this information on you, but could you maybe tell us what is the average salary for public wages in South Africa in comparison to the average public wage salary in the Western Cape maybe, and its respective perks? Because we need to now start looking at what are we paying people? Who are our frontline workers? Because, for example, in COVID, I can tell you if we're going to be looking at people who are employees of our government, we're going to start at frontline workers first to make sure that we have nurses and doctors and teachers that are directly related to service delivery portfolios in comparison to maybe we don't need 5 directors for a particular unit, for example. Then I love the fact that you mentioned, is the IRM useful, on slide 33, which brings me to my next question. The previous Minister of Finance in the appropriations budget of 2022 in the beginning of this year indicated that we will be reviewing Regulation 16B. Where's that? When can we start tabling those infrastructure budgets? And I remember that the review was specifically so that health and education can start deciding, do we want to be our own implementing agents? Do we want to build our own stuff? Do we want to tell the experts in our department, you know best?
Okay. Yeah, I'll answer some of the questions in terms of the one on the children community, right? And then the question around the e-procurement system. So in the company of Treasury, yes, the e-procurement system is not completed as yet. It is in process, and it's also part of their data center, and also linked to the digitalization process in terms of the ICT vision. Transversally for the province in terms of improving supply chain and procurement. Thank you. Only those two.
Yeah. All right, Chair. So let me, and Member Kondlo, we completely agree with you in terms of what this report actually indicates in terms of what is facing us, regarding in terms of what increased demand in our services mean for us, especially frontline services, and then also what then in terms of for those specific frontline staff, in terms of the wage agreement and the fact that we do not have we're not making inflationary increases for that staff. That is something in terms of for us, it's almost as if, you know, we've got another pandemic. It's almost as if the pandemic has not ceased for us, because it just comes in waves from that perspective. So you're quite right, because what we are facing, and the reality is in terms of it is that teacher was 50 learners in a class. And then I'm going to try and indicate in terms of what that actually means then for a social worker and for a teacher. So an average teacher for annual salary is 443,000 rand. And so when we work out in terms of an average within the the development department, an average wage then in the social development department is 433,000 as well. So you can, and those are the averages. So if that is the average, then you must remember there's lower within that bandwidth, and then they are in terms of higher. So and the higher you also need to understand is the impact also that OSD is having also on what is driving in terms of some of the numbers in terms of where we find ourselves now with the salary. With our salary wage bill, in terms of why it cannot be afforded. It's some of those OSD decisions that we made in terms of 5-6 years ago that is now impacting that wage bill. So yes, I'm trying to also answer the questions, some of the questions that the chairperson has asked at the same time with in terms of what we are grappling with. And so you ask in terms of where this is all going to take a head. It is in terms of these are some of the issues that we would need to take up as part of the adjustments budget. So this adjustments budget is not going to be an easy one, because what we're showing you, this is what we are grappling with, that the departments on the front line is grappling with, and that we then need to find in terms of how we're going to respond. Not only from a policy perspective in terms of the medium-term budget policy statement that's going to be put on the table together with the adjustments budget. That together is in terms of where we're looking at in terms of that has been included here, that the rollovers have been taken into account is the national conditional grant rollovers that they've approved. And that is not a lot of money, to be honest with you. It's 21 million, about 13 million of that is about within education, and 56 million is in with health, but the 56 million is not even included in health numbers at this stage. So rollovers at this stage not going to be not included. But you can then see that the underspending of last year, which is technically rollovers, how the conversation in the adjustments budget is going to be different than previous years, because now we need to see whether that rollovers now, that funding can alleviate some of the in-year pressures that the departments are facing. At this stage also no vitamins are indicated in the first quarter. We are expecting departments are going to give us potential vitamins that might have to happen in the adjustments budget, so that they can, for example, in health that we're showing you, that projected over expenditure of program 2, how are the other programs then going to be looked at in terms of to assist to reduce that. So we are expecting some of those kind of early indicators in the second quarter regarding that. Then in terms of the infrastructure and the project delays, I'm going to leave that with class, and then also with class on the IRM. I think we have some update for you on the 16B regulations. And so I'm going to leave that for class, and then just that 985 million, if we do not receive the funding, Dr. Haberman has a magic ball that can see the future. Well, we need to make lemonade, because I mean we got some lemons that's going up at, like they say in Afrikaans, fruit. So so we need to start making lemonade. But that is the thing in terms of why you can see why we're looking at the head count. The reason why we're looking at the head count is important, because we're not looking at trying to if our headcount is going to increase, it needs to increase in the right areas where there are service delivery pressures. That's why we're focusing on the headcount. And so we're looking for that kind of alignment. And because that's a no-brainer. So that's why we're looking at that headcount. But at this stage, Chair, in terms of the 985 million, I think, if it's 985 million for us, we also, it's a fair thing to say that, I mean, we've been prudent, and I think you, as a budget committee, you also aware how prudent we've been in our COE decision making in this province for the last six to 8 years already. But we then are looking at, in terms of, if we are facing this kind of numbers, you can just, those who have not managed their headcount, what that actually looks like for the other provinces. So we're not in that same position. But this is where we're looking at, is, and the fact of the matter is, on the one side, we are making plans. On the other side, we are also then looking at the entire bigger picture, and we're saying, we know that this is, the issue is the least for us of all provinces. So we're also thinking in terms of, that there must be some kind of response, because everyone is aware that we never budgeted for this 3% increase, the salary increase. So from that perspective, I mean, there is going to be some tough decisions that that National is going to make, and that's where we indicated, of the 88,000 head count in terms of staff for the Western Cape government, 92% of that is in the social sector. Yeah. So that's social workers, that's teachers, that's nurses and doctors. And that's why I indicated to you that 985 impacts 2,100 of those frontline staff. So, and that is the argument we've been putting on the table. Because I think everyone is aware, in terms of service delivery, it's the frontline services that is feeling the pressure at the moment. And therefore, this is almost kind of a double whammy from that perspective, that it will, and this is the message that has gone to National. They have responded to the sector before, but we can also live in hope in terms of some of that over-collection share that you have mentioned, the article you mentioned, perhaps in terms of the play. Is also for provinces to ask for a piece of that pie. I think I have answered most of that, except the infrastructure.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Yeah, on the delays and so forth, we will have to engage with departments to quantify that, and I think we will make use of the opportunity, as you suggested, to report on that in a bit more detail in the second quarter, more project-specific details, number of projects and so forth. And then on the Provincial Treasury Instruction 16B, that was repealed with effect of 1st September. We also repealed the cabinet approval, repealed the Western Cape Infrastructure Delivery Management System. It all goes hand in hand as one system. And then finally, Cabinet also amended some of the previous Cabinet resolutions around the preferred implementing agent that was, or department that was interpreted as sole. So that was also amended to read as a implemented department, and that will then free up to some extent the hands of the other budget holders like education and health to explore other opportunities as well. Thank you, Chair.
So you're saying that from next month onwards, you guys can start tabling the infrastructure budgets?
No, the repeal is effective from the 1st of September, but the systems and the stuff we use doesn't matter who the implementer now. We can still do it.
Chair, then I don't want to leave. My conscience is going to prick me if I now just remembered that you asked the question on the draft preferential procurement, if I'm correct. And I'm just to indicate you complete transparency. I'm actually reading from the presentation of National Treasury. It's not that I know everything within the Treasury. So in terms of the draft preferential procurement regulation, so as Chair, you're probably aware, so in terms of, there was public comments until the 11th of April. So what is actually happening in the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, the OCPO, that they, at this stage, they, in terms of, they've worked through the comments that they've received, and then they have now, in terms of the revisions, they've made revisions, and now they're at the an internal stage with the National Treasury Legislation Unit, and also in terms of the National Treasury OCPO, and then and the Legislation Unit, in terms of just to discuss the impact and reach agreement in terms of what that actually means for a lead time in terms of allowing a delayed effective date, and then also then for the organs of state to familiarize themselves with the content, and then to develop their own preferential procurement policy. So that's where it is. It's still in terms of at the legal phase at this stage, to discuss in terms of what is the effective date that can be expected in terms of for practicalities. So that's where it is at the moment.
Am I hearing you right? So we as the Western Cape and our respective organs of state would also have to create their own separate regulations based on the court case, because it is all separate organs of state.
Just differentiate, so there's obviously the Public Procurement Bill, which is to comprehensively replace the procurement system, which, as Annelies has indicated, is still in the process inside National Treasury to kind of work out where they're going to take that. Then there's obviously the big issue about the public procurement regulations, which were obviously declared unconstitutional, and we have now developed our own regulatory framework for that, because each organ of state had to create their own preferential procurement system. What we did is we essentially took the old policy and using it now. So we just cut and paste the old policy, which was the most practical way forward. And subsequently, the Auditor General has also given guidance on how they're going to treat the audits. During the period that these regulations were, there was a period of uncertainty. And I must say, I think the Auditor General has given very good guidance in terms of that. And very helpful guidance that they're not going to find, particularly municipalities or even provincial departments, to be irregular expenditure or unauthorized expenditure, because it was actually uncertain for everybody, as you know, like what the rules were. So very, I think, reasonable guidance from the Auditor General. So I think that process is now we're kind of all on top of where we're going with that process. It's now in train.
That you got from the AG about how to treat it. I'm not sure if it's a confidential document or not, but can we get it?
On that, yeah. Let me engage with them on that, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Colleagues, any urgent questions on this regard? I only have one follow-up question. Mine is, because you've now cut and pasted the document because we woke up one day and the regulations are unconstitutional. So is this an interim solution? Are you working on creating a Western Cape flavored one, or is this going to be the one forever and ever?
We'll have to come back, Chair, on that. We're doing a lot of internal work on exactly how we're going to take forward the public procurement regulations at the moment. I mean, there are a number of competing objectives we have to achieve. We've also been engaging with municipalities, et cetera, et cetera. So we will come back to you on that.
Okay, colleagues, anything else? I don't see any hands online. With that, I would like to thank Provincial Treasury and the Department of Premier. I really enjoyed this quarterly performance engagement. I'm not sure if everyone can always say that, because we are still in the process of making finance fun again. But with that, you are welcome to adjourn. Thank you so much for all the hard work that has gone into this. I mean, I'm thinking back to some of the previous meetings where you said, we are going to put this and this and this and this and this into the new reporting, and like just reading the report, it makes my heart happy. So please go home knowing that you are doing a great service to this province, ensuring that how we make decisions are done in a prudent, reliable and useful manner. Thank you so much. You're welcome to go about your day-to-day work. Members, if you can just stay behind so we can deal with committee business, and then we are off for the day. Thank you so much. Members, the first item that we need to deal with is our draft report on the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook 2022. Ms. Kamish Ahmed, if you can just put the draft up. As you all know, every year we don't need to agree or disagree with the payroll like in normal votes. We basically report on the fact that we've deliberated on the matter. So if you can see the draft report, I'm just going to read it out. And if you are happy, then I'm just going to ask for movers of the report. So draft report of the budget. Is jy okay so? Yeah, you mustn't scare me like that. Okay, draft report of the Budget Committee, having considered the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook 2022, dated 20 September 2022 as follows. The Budget Committee reports that it convened on 20 September and has concluded its deliberations on the Western Cape Government, Provincial Economic Review and Outlook 2022, and the reference must just change there to 2022, referred to it. So the reference there will be the reference of the report, of the ATC. That's basically what goes into that. Yes. Members, are you happy with the report? Happy? Okay, everything sounds unanimous. Thank you so much. With that, the report is then adopted. We can take the words draft out and you can put the ATC reference in. And just check quickly the reference at the top of the committee report if it's correct. When you go to the line, is that correct? Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, then we have one set of minutes for the 5th of August. Thank you. Is she okay? Oh. See. Let's click now. Okay. Or if you just make it a tiny bit bigger for me, please. Here we go. Thank you so much. This is the 5th of August. Let's go down quickly. There's all of the attendance. Okay, briefing by the FFC. That was the DORA submission. And then we adopted a set of minutes. And then we had our... Technically 4.1 they've already submitted to us, but that, yeah, it's basically the payroll, but it's okay. Perfect. Adoption mover for the minutes. Member Plato. Seconder for the minutes. Who else is here? Who's online? I see member Mari's hand, I think. Mari's hand. Second. Thank you so much. And I hear member Mackenzie's voice as well. Thank you so much. The minutes are so adopted. Then I just have some feedback from members. Let me get to... okay. We had resolutions and actions and feedback. I know Member Nkondlo asked that we do a presentation on the fiscal futures. I'm happy with that. Are there any objections? People happy with that? Cool. And then we do need to reschedule the Western Cape Children's Commissioner session just on budgeting for children. As you know, at that stage, there was a health matter in her personal life, and I just want to ask if it's okay if we just reschedule that. Everyone okay with that? Perfect. And that goes with the PEO briefing on public participation for the budget cycle. So the reason we rescheduled was because it didn't make sense to have a whole 3-hour meeting just for the PEO briefing. We were trying to schedule it both at the same time so that we can save time on the respective dates. So we will then just reschedule those two then together. And then, do you have the letter that we received? Based on our previous resolution of the Budget Committee, we asked for the Minister of Public Enterprises to just come and speak to us on the impact of bailouts of SOEs on the Western Cape provincial budgets and provincial budgets in general. We sent the invitation. We got a letter back to indicate that the Minister feels that it should go to the NCOP. I think the Minister actually misunderstood perhaps the scope of work that we asked for. We didn't ask for the whole national government, only asked for the impact on the Western Cape provincial budget. For example, in economic development previously, we asked for similar information on ESCOM from a different minister. So, yes, you can flight it and you can send it to members as well. Have you sent it? Perfect. So you can flight it. Okay, so the question now is, members, I'm bringing this back to you. You must now tell me, do we write a second letter trying to clarify the scope of the matter and re-invite the minister? Do we let the resolution fall away? You must now give me guidance on the matter. Member Fry?
Chair, I propose that we just ask the minister just to come and speak to the scope of the matter.
Okay, so basically we must just clarify. Okay.
Yes.
Member Nkondlo?
Chair, with that said, I don't have an issue. I support we can still clarify, but I think there's nothing that takes away from us following up on the NCOP. That is why we have the NCOP, colleagues. So let's not try to create, lots of red tape when we need information, because if indeed, according to his recommendation, we can get the information, let's get to understand that, so that if there is practice, we can follow on that practice, because the issue is not to be seen that we are getting the minister. We want the information, and that is what we must be focusing on. So I want to support that proposal, that we can do the clarification, but also go to the NCOP, so that at the end of the day, we get what we desire as a committee. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to do both. We're going to then ask our NCOP colleagues for assistance. I think from their perspective, they'll probably want to deal with the topic as a whole for South Africa, probably, and not just the Western Cape, because there are 9 provinces in the NCOP. And then from our side, that we just clarify that actually our scope of our request relates to the impact of our Western Cape provincial budget. Okay, thank you so much. Then, let me just see here quickly, other feedback. Members, you receive lots of documents from us regarding the money bills. That was relating to the proposal from WCPP regarding draft rules. I'm going to be honest with you, I think there was a misunderstanding at the start regarding whether the draft bill or the draft rules must be written first. They did come to me and say they already started working on the draft proposal for the rules. They indicated that they are able to put the first draft of the bill together by the 10th of October. And my suggestion then is I engage the program with Ms. Simon, and the 24th of October is free for us in order for the legal unit to then brief us on both draft documents when we have received them all, as well as for us to get inputs from the FFC, from the National Treasury, from the Provincial Treasury on the respective documentation, as well as the research unit still has one last report that we asked for that they need to brief us on. But I would also like to do something similar to what we did with the first workshop, where all the previous documentation to that particular workshop, the respective political party representatives can come and then give feedback on the respective documentation and drafts that they've received so far. And then we can indicate, do you agree with X? Do you disagree with Y? You want to amend Z? Do you want more information on A, etc., etc.? So that is just the feedback that I have from members. So you will get some more homework from our side, but please, if you can just engage your respective organizations, and then we will put that workshop together where we can all come together and say, this is how we feel about the first draft. Please take our information and go forth and write a second draft, or if by some miracle we don't disagree with anything, then we can say, okay, we are happy. But I'm sure that this is going to be a fruitful and productive season when it comes to money bills and budgetary matters. Are there any specific questions on the feedback? None? With that, thank you so much. I know the payroll and adjustment season is always quite robust and difficult on the time constraints of members, so I always appreciate you remaining to the bitter end here with me in the chambers. I hope you have a safe and warm evening going forward, and that load shedding doesn't burden you too much today. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.